Do all that again.
No, we're good.
Did you also see that?
I did, thank you.
Am I good? There you go.
He's just double checking, but I think we're good. I think the Getty mic hasn't worked. Are we good now? We tested.
We're good?
You know,
All right.
go for it.
Well, I wanted to thank Light and Power for Keith and Eddie. Thank you for allowing us to use the room. The community auditorium was quite crowded tonight with another pre-scheduled meeting. Also want to thank you for the popcorn. It was a wonderful addition to the meeting. So, thank you. So, we got one of those in the budget for admin. I'm joking. And also, of course, thank you to the council and to the resident members of the budget committee for being here tonight. So my comments are going to total about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and it's going to be kind of the Paul Downey show. Paul has a PowerPoint of 50-some slides, I guess, Paul. So, high 40. My comments are intended to kind of just provide an overall framework. Really, tonight's focus is the general fund. And the general fund has a couple characteristics to just be mindful of. And this is especially for those that are either new to the budget committee or have been new to us for the past couple of years. But the general fund's a little bit different in that not quite half, but about 42% of it is funded by property taxes and the local option levy. And that's composed of our permanent rate of 3.96, and then you add the local option levy, and I believe it's for a total of 5.5 per thousand. The general fund is discretionary, and so what that means is it's a fund source that's not limited for a certain purpose, and it can be spent on the delivery of several different services. In this case, police, fire, library, parks and recreation, and some components of administration and community development. This is different from some of the other rates and fees that you're going to hear about throughout this budget process that are more self-sustaining. And an example of that are limited in nature. Those would be like the gas tax, the electricity bill, building fees that are paid at the time of development. Those are all what's called restricted funds, and they are restricted for the use in which that charge is for. So in those particular cases, the gas tax is restricted for roads, and I believe it's also eligible for pedestrian. Electric bills are restricted to light and power, and of course, building fees are restricted for building compliance, and you'll see a fund about that. There's other ones; those are just kind of examples. So, but that's the difference between the general fund and kind of all of the rest of the other funds, is that discretionary versus that restricted purpose. Paul and I will go into detail for each fund, including any changes from last year and any staff proposals for that specific fund. I do want to thank those who submitted questions ahead of time. Chair Anderson, we received your questions. Thank you. We really appreciate getting those in advance. That helps us to be able to research those topics and get back to you with an answer. We will address those questions and any other questions that you have when we discuss the fund source that those questions will pertain to. So for this year, this is the first time in the first year that we've ever done a biennial budget. It was admittedly a lot of work up front, and there is going to be what we would characterize as some mid-cycle adjustments. Those would be adjustments same time, same place next year that we will have to make. Some people call it a supplemental process. We call it a mid-cycle adjustments process. Either way, there's going to be some kind of tweaking to the budget, if you will, but it's not going to be to the extent that you would otherwise have in an annual budget. It's going to be a minor component, not necessarily a major component. By all accounts, this process has fostered longer-term conversations and more closely aligned with the council's values of strategic planning and financial stewardship. I was talking with Director Lane earlier. Oftentimes when staff has a lot of meetings prior to a proposed budget, there's a lot of concepts that are put out. There's a lot of proposals that are put out. And it was really interesting this year, unlike in prior years, by adding 1 year to the conversation. I mean, kind of literally 1 year, from going from 1 year to 2 years. That second year conversation really facilitated conversations about the third year. and the 4th year, and in some cases, the 5th year. And in doing so, the first 2 years, in a lot of cases, actually change. Some things would get bumped forward, some things would get bumped back, some things would be spread out over 3 to 5 years. So even though that may not have been the intent to do some strategic planning over 5 years, oftentimes the outcome was exactly that by just simply adding that extra year of the process. So in terms of facilitating these strategic discussions, it was a resounding success. There are several distinct themes that you're going to hear for this year's budget. First, it attempts to reflect the council's values, goals, and objectives. We covered what those were in the first national budget committee meeting. I think principally, it seeks to meet the city's commitment to the voters and the local option levy to implement public safety, to improve public safety by adding police and firefighters, and in doing so, reduce response times for these services. Chief Carrion is not able to join us tonight. I talked with him on the phone this morning. He is not feeling well. And no offense, Chief Carrion, if you're on the line, but you didn't sound well either. So he's not going to be able to be with us tonight. We do have Chief Ryman, and so thank you for being here. Also, we have, I was remiss, we have Director Ann Lane from Parks and Rec. We have Director Brian Pohl from Community Development, and of course, Director Colleen Winters from the library. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, Jamie, thank you so much for setting all this up.
Yes.
Overall, the fiscal health of the city, I left out a couple things, I apologize. You'll notice that we have some proposals for staffing, we have some proposals for programs. I do want to emphasize that in that analysis, we used current and comparable performance metrics and or operational metrics on which to base our proposals. We did as much research as we could prior to making these proposals. I'm not sure that we'll have all the answers to all the questions that you have, but we'll certainly have as many as we could find. So feel free to please ask questions. Do our best to answer those. And then last, we really sought to find innovative ways to approach difficult staffing challenges that are not just Forest Grove, but are really kind of shared by municipalities. The two that kind of come to mind are GIS and information technology. We're seeing that be somewhat prolific, not just in us, but in cities of our size. We've seen very similar challenges. Overall, the fiscal health of the city is stable. That's measured by the amount of reserves that we have, what our actualized revenue was the past 2 years versus what our projected revenue is also projected to be, what our annual audits are stating, and what our industry bond ratings are. Take those in combination, all of those are stable, all of those are good. Some top level attributes to help inform today's meeting. At just over 27,000 people, population in Forest Grove continues to grow. It's slightly more than about 1% per year. It's done that over the past 4 years. This has outpaced the county, the state, and Portland, which have experienced either flat or in some cases declining population. We've had 2,072 housing units, that's both multifamily and residential, that have been constructed over the past decade, or about a little over 200 units per year, including both single family and multifamily. We also have about 540 building permits in the pipeline that have yet to be constructed. And so, and looking out over this biennium, we expect that population trend to continue based on the building permits and based on what we think the housing units will be constructed over the next 2 years. The city's industrial and commercial vacancy rates remain near zero, indicating a strong business demand. Additionally, Forest Grove continues to receive commercial and industrial interest with several projects in progress for both commercial and for industrial. Assessed value of residences, which directly correlates with general fund revenues, has increased 6.27% and 4.8% over the past 2 years. Staff is projecting slower growth over the next 2 years and has budgeted our revenues at increasing by 4.5% in each year of the biennium. Expenses, however, have also increased. In some cases, higher than projected revenue, and in other cases, less. Regarding increases that are higher than expected revenues, insurance premiums for general liability, property, and auto are projected to increase between 5 to 9% in each of the next 2 years. Cumulatively, that would be 10 to 18%. Medical premiums are expected to increase between 7 to 13% in each of the next 2 years. Again, cumulatively, that would be 14 to 26% over the biennium. PERS is increasing 8% this year, but then is flat and no increase next year. Effectively, that's a little bit more than a 4% increase each year because the increase is realized in the first year. It's not exactly what our projected revenues are or our projected growth, but it's pretty close. So another way to say it is our PERS expenses staying at pace and maybe a little bit below what our projected revenue is. The city's defined benefit plan, which is now closed. If you recall, we had 3 retirement plans at the city. One is defined contribution, we have defined benefit, and then we have PERS. But the city's defined benefit plan, which is now closed, is decreasing its annual expense a little over $500,000 due primarily to strong investment returns in the market last year. The city expects this lower amount to continue. When I say lower amount, that reduced amount that we have to put into the budget for our defined benefit plan, we expect that to continue provided the rate of return for the investment meets the assumed rate of return of 5.25% for the investment fund. And that's a number which I want to mention has strategically been brought down or lowered over the past decade due to intentional stewardship by this committee and by the city council. There's been more contributions to the investment fund to lower that rate of return. Previously, Paul, it was probably 7%.
Yeah, sorry.
I think it started at 7. It's strategically been bought down over the past 5 to 10 years to 5.25%. And it's done that to really reduce the risk to the city. And so provided that we can have an annualized rate of return of 5.25%, that reduction of $500,000 per year should maintain with us. If we make less than that, then we would have to contribute more to the fund. If we make more, we should actually maybe have even less. That's, I think, a pretty important point because some of the surpluses that have been made in the past years have, from the general fund and from the overall budget, have been made to kind of shore that investment account up, if you will. And we're seeing some of the benefits of that long-term thinking here today. So, by way of comparison, Oregon's PERS assumed rate of return is 6.9%. So ours is 5.25, so that's the expectation. PERS is still at 6.9%. The main component of expenses is personnel wages. Recall that approximately 80% of the city's workforce is represented by one of 4 bargaining units. We have ASME, or the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. We have the Police Officers Association, Firefighters Association, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, or IBEW. Prior to the onset of every negotiation, the city conducts a thorough wage assessment utilizing similarly situated cities to ensure that our wages do not fall behind. Here's what we can expect over the biennium in terms of wages. Fire's contract covers both years of the budget, their bargaining contract, so the wages are set, and they're set at 4% each year by contract. ASME and IBEW's contracts will go through half of the biennium, or 1 year. They both expire June 30th of next year. Those wages are set by contract for the first year of the biennium at 2.7 and 3.5%. Those contracts will have to be negotiated. We will have to do a mid-cycle supplemental related to what those contracts come out at. Police's contract is expiring on June 30th, and we're presently in negotiations. So we'll have to look at potentially a budget amendment for that. And then the remaining employees at the city, or approximately 20% of the workforce, are referred to as what is called unrepresented. Staff is proposing a wage increase of 3% per year for those. Those wages are typically tied to the West Coast CPI. The consumer price index, we are seeing the consumer price index in the West Coast dip slightly. It's starting to go slightly. Right now, it's actually 2.7%. If that continues to fall, we may adjust that downward in the mid-cycle adjustment depending on what that West Coast CPI does. But at least for the budget as a placeholder now, we put in 3% for both years of the biennium. Regarding employees, staff is proposing to add 6.3 positions and attrition 2 positions for a total add of 4.3 positions over the 2 years for an increase of about 1% in employment per year. Each position is detailed in the budget message and will be reviewed with the committee. Similarly, we plan to hold 3 positions vacant until more is known about the operational, structural, and funding changes associated with each of those positions. All 3 of those positions processes are actively in place right now. And so this was something that was kind of thought about. We're looking at the status of those. We will have more of those. In some cases, we'll have more on those soon. But those are being held, at least for right now, vacant. Prior to closing my message, I do want to acknowledge that there was an error in the budget message. The new program that we have, you have to copy from Word and then you have to paste it into the budget message. There was one section that got mostly copied and kind of half pasted, I guess.
No, I just, when we did that, when I went, I'll take it. When I went to copy over, I missed it. And so it didn't get copied over. It's the light and power section.
Yeah, so the light and power section had last year's budget message. Our apologies for the inadvertent error. It's since been corrected. Actually, that fund will be discussed next week. So if you have any questions on that section of the budget, please let me call or myself know. In closing, staff recognized this year would be more work, and it was, but the additional year injected more thought, analysis, and strategic consideration into the process. And it really did paint a clearer picture of the next 2 years than you would have otherwise got if you just did it 1 year plus 1 year. While there will be a mid-cycle reconciliation, notwithstanding new items, another benefit to this process is when we do the reconciliation, because we will have talked about those items tonight, those items will be known. And it won't be starting from fresh, we'll be starting from midway through the cycle, and it can be something that you can kind of hit the ground running, if you will. This budget allows the city to maintain services in all areas and enhance services in others. And that's in keeping with the public's desire to increase public safety and the city's commitment to voters under the local option levy to do likewise. My sincere appreciation to the city council, to the budget committee, and the city staff for the direction to initiate a biennial budget and for the patience and consideration to work through it in the best interest of the city. And of course, I have to close by thanking Paul Downey
Let's
for
go.
some very long days and some very late nights. Wrangle about 100 different requests and some 30-odd funds into the computer to make them balanced and to make them understandable, transparent, and importantly, accountable to our city's residents. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I think we'll just roll right into Paul's discussion then.
Oh, I'm ready. Slight confession before we start. We didn't have any computers yesterday, so we had a major IT issue. I was going to work on the presentation yesterday and today, so I only worked on this today. So if it's gonna be a little rough and he didn't have time to review it, so it'll be a little sketchy in a few spots, but
If there's not a copy and a paste, then you'll understand.
Yeah. You won't know it if you get the actual paper copy in the file, so I'll have it corrected by then.
Well, we'll see how people are, how well they're paying attention.
I was gonna say, that's my fault, I said it. I'm like, I'm just saying.
Well, can you just check really quick to make sure that your clicker's working? Oh, it might not be on.
On.
And it's right.
Right. We'll work our way through this. Before we start, just gonna make a comment on the process for the meetings. We're planning on doing 3 meetings and quite a bit to discuss. And there's actually some hefty topics to discuss this year. We're planning on doing 3. So the 3rd meeting is where we'll ask you to approve both the city's budget and the URA's budget. And as Mod said, when the police facility bond passes next week, you're going to see the 3rd week, you'll see an addition to the budget where I'll be adding the money to build the police building plus the debt service. So you'll see about a $30-something million addition to the proposed budget at the last meeting. So just wanted to make that note. Okay, so first screen purpose of mine is to get a review proposed budget and also getting public comment if there's any. So we had the informational meeting on April 16th where we talked about some of the stuff Jesse talked about. You know, I'll have some slides, but I'll skip through the information where Jesse's already brought some of it up. And we had some of those slides. You see, the first thing is the total budget. You'll see on all these things, all these slides, if I've changed the years correctly, we'll have fiscal year 25 through 27 as the lead. And you'll see the total budget, proposed budget is $253.6 million roughly. And that compares to last year's about $160.2 million. So you may ask yourself, why why don't we have a $320 million two-year proposed budget? The difference is we don't have the ending fund balance in the first year, which translates to the beginning fund balance in the second year. So there's no fund balance change over those 2 years. For those 2 years, and that's why the two-year budget is not double what the current budget is. Let's see what we're gonna do tonight. Talk about information. Jesse's already talked about the budget message. You can read those information, Commonwealth funds, resources, individual general funds, proposed budgets, and a few other funds managed by general fund department directors. For that way, principally Ann and Brian don't have to come back at the next meeting if they don't want to. So we try to get their budgets in for them. Conduct the first public hearing on the state shared revenue. Take any comment on the public on the proposed budget, and then we'll also have the first meeting for URA budget meeting at the end of this meeting. Jesse would deliver the URA budget message. I'm sure you brought it in. So moving into this, next slide. General fund revenues, like Jess said, revenues need to be strong. We grew 4.9% for property taxes due to the increase in assessed value. We had projected 4%. We're budgeting 4.5% for the next 2 years, each of the next 2 years. Interest rates have peaked kind of, and they're projected to start declining sometime. But we anticipate our interest rates going to remain high because due to strong cash balances in most funds, and also we're replacing some lower earning interest maturing investments with higher maturing investments. A couple of years ago, when we were about the pool balance, we were having to invest money at 0.25% interest or 0.5% interest, because that's what the interest rates were at the time. So you put your money out for 2 or 3 years at that rate, didn't get a lot. A lot of the times now we're replacing it for almost 4%, so that's a significant interest rate difference. So that's why we're anticipating some of the interest earnings to remain strong. All utility rates were increased last year, and staff requests increasing utility rates again. EPA is proposing power and transmission rate increases at October 1st, 2025. We're going to review the potential rate effect of Forest Grove customers, report the findings to the council in August of 2025. EPA is supposed to have their final rate increases out in August of 2025. And at that point in time, we'll finalize it. We'll talk about light power rates next week. We'll talk about light power. Water rates are being reviewed as part of the water rate / SDC study. We're going to propose a 3% in the interim, so we keep gradual smaller increases going instead of having to do one large rate increase. The city, sewer, and surface water portions of those rates are proposed to increase by 4% respectively. Clean Water Services is proposing to raise their rates by 4%, their sewer and swim rates by 4%. Any questions on that? Overall expenses. When we budget, the proposed budget assumes full employment, meaning we budget that all positions will be filled at all times during the year, and obviously that doesn't happen. We'll have some vacancies during parts of the year as we try to fill some positions. Actually, paid leave Oregon is also starting to affect some of the salaries of employees who have paid leave Oregon. We're not paying their city salaries, so there's some lower cost of the budget for them not being there during that time. It causes some angst with the remaining staff and some departments, but that's probably what we have to deal with. And we've had some significant savings in fiscal year 24-25 due to vacancies in the administrative services, police, and fire departments. So you probably read in the budget message, we had about the surplus we had. We'll talk about that even later. Inflation appears leveling off, continues to affect costs. Some of the personnel contracts or labor contracts are expiring. Some of the unions are wanting to make up for some of that inflation, higher inflation during the times where they have lower cost of living rates in effect. So they're asking for higher cost of living rates now than what the CPI is now, because they're trying to make up for what they consider lost wages during that inflation. We've already talked about wage and benefits and major drivers of the cost in the general fund. Other expenses like vehicle expenses and certain supplies continue to increase significantly, be affected by inflation. Property liability premiums are increasing higher than inflation due to higher costs throughout the insurance industry. You're having a lot of negative claims experience, and it does reflect, even though we're with city county insurance services, which is a pool of local Oregon governments, they're still affected by the experience industry wide because they go out and they buy reinsurance. They insure up to a certain point themselves, then they go out and buy reinsurance for losses above a certain amount. When you go out to the reinsurance market, you get involved. That's where the total market comes into play. So they are experiencing some larger costs because of that. Certain large equipment purchases, such as some of the trucks for light power, some of the boom trucks, and some of the fire apparatus, continue to be challenging due to the time it takes to acquire the equipment. And what we were ordering 2 to 3 years prior to the time that we want to put the equipment into service. So it's affecting our planning and some of our cash flows as we're having to do deposits for some of that equipment earlier than we might like to. This kind of slide I always put in, I like to put this in every year. What this does is looks at the other larger cities in Washington County, takes the certified population estimate at July 1st, 2024, and looks at the assessed value for each of those at July 1st, 2024. Now, then we calculate what I call the assessed value per capita. That's for each person at Forest Grove, we have an assessed value per capita of about $87,000. Notice Tualatin, which is about our size, has an assessed value per capita of about $214,000 per person. So it makes a large difference. Where you see these cities with the larger assessed value per capita, they tend to have more commercial and industrial, or both. So that's the story there. You'll see Cornelius and Forest Grove or towards the bottom of the list, and you don't have the commercial or the industrial in the town that the other one has. So, but it's not the only story. You'll notice tax rates. The tax rates are significantly different for some. Tualatin doesn't have a local option levy like we do. Their tax rate's lower. Hillsborough is about what ours is, fairly close to what ours is. Yeah, I got a mistake on this thing. Actually, I don't. The cities that are highlighted in green, we own and operate our own fire departments. The other cities are part of 12 Valley Fire and Rescue, and they need to add 230 something. Their rate currently is 208, but I believe it's going up to 230 something, 235 next year. So you have to add, let's say for like Tualatin, you have to add $2. Right now, $2.08, or for next year, $2.35 to that rate where you see Tualatin's rate. So their rate would be about $4.59 or $4.60. So it's getting closer to ours.
Can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
I guess there's another thing that might be a little bit misleading about that is some of those municipalities also have the Parks District, the Water District, and a Fire District. So if you look at the city of Beaverton, for example, Beaverton's effective tax rate for the city is 4.17. But if you add in all of those special districts, some of the current estimates are $13 per assessment per thousand, which is more than double what Forest Groves is. And that's that kind of interrelationship between special districts, what the municipality does, what a special district with a different board, different taxation, different powers does, and a city such as Forest Grove that's full service, that offers all of those services in a combined effective tax. So
That would be, I think that would be a really powerful communication tool at some point to display this column that you have, and then the effective tax rate when you put in the special districts.
we actually have that slide, Chair, and we can, we'll make a note and we can bring that back to the next budget committee meeting. We had that slide when we did an annual town meeting at one point, what the effective tax rate is. And it's even more interesting when you add in PGE. Not the key to my power. So,
Yeah, I think timing, of course, is right to influence the current election for the police station, but this kind of information is helpful for citizens who wonder why things are so expensive. Just look at that and say, this is the most expensive city on the list. but of course it's not, but it looks that way, and sometimes it feels that way. But, yeah, I think that would be a
Bring that back.
powerful message to have, not just for this group, but at other points in time when you need to help people understand why things are what they are.
The wages and benefits, we already talked about some. Jesse's talked about quite a few things on this page, so we'll, like I said, things we don't know about, the other ones we do, so I think Jesse pretty much covered this in his, down to the medical, you know, the major changes are Regents is going up 7%, tires is going up 13% for medical and 3% for dental. Most other dental premiums are going up 7%. And we projected sort of the same increases for the final year of the 2-year budget. A little conservative and not get caught, but hopefully it'll be less, we'll have some savings, but we won't know until later. And like I say, with the 3% from the non-rep, we look at last year's CPI, which was 2.7, but we also look at what other comparable cities that we have that we compare ourselves to are doing. One thing we don't want to do is fall too far behind in comparable wages, because then when we do a wage and benefit study, we do our wage studies every 3 years, and we don't somewhat keep up with what the other COLAs the other cities are giving, then we fall behind market, then we have to do a spot adjustment when we do those wage and salary studies every 3 years. So we take a look at it. It doesn't drive the decision, because some cities are giving like 4% this year, so but we're only trying not to be too far below, so we don't be too far out of pace.
That's clarify something.
Yeah.
So when Paul mentions the spot adjustment, essentially that is if the if the position comes in 3% under the market, it's a spot adjustment to get it back to zero, if you will, and it's independent of the cost of living increases that are otherwise negotiated in the contract. So if you have a 4% COLA for that year and you have a spot adjustment for that position, and it's normally specific to that position would effectively have a 7% raise that year, 3% for the spot adjustment to reconcile it back to the market median, and then the COLAs kick in from there.
Okay. Workers' compensation premiums are expected to increase by about 10% next year. However, we're not changing the budgeted charges to each of the departments. For the departments, because we have enough reserves. We have enough reserves in our risk management fund to cover the cost of the increase without increasing the cost of the department. So I've tried to keep the workers' compensation charges flat for the departments from year to year. Sometimes they'll go up, sometimes they'll go down. But I try to keep them at a level premium if I can, so they're not bouncing all over, but we're having to adjust them all the time. As Jesse said, the defined benefit plan earned 11.82%, which is more than our assumed rate of return of 5.25%. So due to those earnings, the defined benefit contributions will decrease, that should say. By $532,000 to a total of $4,738,000. Of that $532,000 decrease, $377,000 will go to the general fund, about 94 to fire, about 101 to police, and the rest of the other departments in the general fund. $96,000 will go to light power, $59,000 will go to public works. I had the actuaries calculate the contributions by general employees, police, fire, light power, and public works, so I know specifically what all those contributions are in those various funds. We didn't budget to increase those contributions in the second year of the biennium, and they should not increase unless the earnings go below 5.25%. If they do, contributions may go up. But as you remember, some of you remember, the general fund has set aside $900,000 in smoothing reserves in the general fund, so we can absorb some defined benefit plan increases without having to raise the premium, without having to raise the expenses to the funds. We don't expect to have to use any of the smoothing reserves in the proposed 2-year budget. Right now, I'm going to say right now, because there's a month and a half to still screw me up, even with all fluctuations we've had up and down in the retirement plan, we're still slightly above our assumed rate of return right now. So hopefully we can hold on for the rest of the year. PERS rates are increasing over the 2-year period. The rates will stay the same for the 2 years after the agreement on July 1st. Safety for those in the Oregon Public Service Retirement Plan, portion of PERS or OPSERV, some people call it Tier 3, will increase. Their rates will change from 22.25 to 24.22%, and from 23.92 to 25.35 for Tier 1, Tier 2 employees, for public safety employees. The OPSERV rate for general employees will increase from 17.46 to 18.95%. Those rates include the 6% employee contribution. So that 18.95, 12.95 is the employer contribution. 6% is the employee contribution, but the city makes the employee contribution and the employer contribution. We agreed, that's something the council agreed to do when we started moving people to PERS back in 2016. We still have a defined contribution plan for roughly 12 ASME employees, maybe fewer now. I think 1 or 2 may have left. And that rate remains at 12%. Those are the employees that chose not to go to PERS for some reason. Jesse's already talked about the property liability insurance premiums. Yeah, but it turned on. That is not dead, it's just not cooperating.
Katie, can you answer?
There we go.
Back one slide.
Too far now.
All right.
All right, we're just gonna quickly go over some benefits and some personnel cost type information. You'll see little bitty print on the right hand side. Glad I got my glasses on. Fiscal year 24-25. If you look at personnel, it's 100% of this circle we've got here. Wages were about 58%, and total benefit portions of it are about 42%. For 25-27, the wages are about 59.5%, and the benefits are about 40.5%. Good portion of that change in the graph and the 2 charts are due to the $532,000 reduction in the defined benefit contributions. Some of the wages are obviously due to wage increases as well. So. If you look at benefits, can't really look at it on here. We're not going to spend too long on this. The biggest chunk there is for the retirement. Retirement costs are over half of all the benefits we pay out. Medical premiums are roughly about 29% of what we pay out on benefits. FICA would be about 11% of the total benefits. So just showing you the retirement benefits are a significant portion of our benefits cost. If you like it in table form, that's the same thing in table form. You can actually read that one now. As you'll see, retirement costs for the next biennium are about 53%. Total benefits, rather come down, we're about 29%. So the other page, so that's haven't changed a whole lot. They typically don't change a lot unless the retirement changes significantly. Resources. Total general fund biennium is $67.4 million. Beginning fund balance is expected to be about a little over $10 million, which is an increase of about $2.8 million over June 30th, 2025, projecting ending fund balance of about $7.2 million, which we projected a year ago. Most of that increase is projected to occur on July 21st. Is the beginning fund balance was higher this last year, by about $1.4 million than we projected, and plus those personnel vacancies in several departments and some increased interest earnings over what we had projected. We talked about the general fund assessed value projected to grow by 4.5%. A total of $2.46 billion for the next year and 4.5% to about $2.57 billion for fiscal year 26-27. All property tax revenue goes into the general fund. It's projected to account for 49.1% of the operating revenue in the next biennium. State shared revenue declined in 24-25 compared to the budgeted amount. Some of that was population differences that were used, and also some of the actual per capita amounts the state paid out went down. And the 2020 for the next biennium, we based state shared revenue on the per capita revenue that we get from the estimates that we get from the state of Oregon and the estimated population that we get from Oregon State University Population Center. And those are expected to start increasing slightly or remain flat. Most of our other revenues are projected to remain flat for the next biennium, most of the other fees and things of that nature. Oh, so far, not too hard. The fee study for the Parks and Recreation is ongoing, and the fee changes for those services will be based on results of the study. And so I show when the completion time is on that. They're still going through some iterations of some policy discussions, and it has to come to the council for policy discussions. Franchise fees were lower than budgeted this year due to the decline in Northwest Natural Gas television cable franchise fees. Northwest Natural Gas can fluctuate quite a bit depending on how cold the winter is. So,
All of that, just we take a percentage of their revenue.
yeah, it's 5% of their revenue for what they collect inside the city of Forest Grove. This year was $300,000. The year before was like $330,000. So that went down. We're budgeting franchise fees for the next biennium to remain relatively flat based on our action, based on what we're thinking we're going to get from this year's proposed franchise fees.
Do we charge franchise fees for the internet providers?
No. You get TV cable fees, but you don't get them for the internet providers.
Why is that?
You can get them for the internet providers when potentially if they put in their own stuff, but like Comcast, for what it does for its internet fees, you don't get.
But Ziply has fiber optic, right?
Ziply has fiber optic, yeah. You get Ziply for their TV cable fee, for their TV cable, plus for their telephone lines, but not for their internet.
That's something we don't get to choose, or that
No.
chooses that.
State.
Because, you know, any more internet is gonna
Yeah.
surpass any other service as the more
But-
valuable thing.
But some of these companies just putting just broadband in. We do, like the one that's the school district, they're putting in for the school district. Get the name of it on top of my head, I've been working on numbers in the past month. We will actually get a fee off of those because that is their principal use of the right of way. For like Ziply and Comcast, their internet, they had their right of way stuff in before internet came. And so they've been unable to add the internet fees. Because you're not using any additional right of way. So they've been able to say, we can't collect them on the internet fees. So, but for other broadband companies, where that's their only use of the right of way, yes, we're able to collect them.
So the legislature could redefine that if they chose to, couldn't they?
If they chose, that'd be a nice fight. So we got, I'm going to quickly go through some charts summarizing the general fund resources. And first one's the general fund resources summary. It's just broken out by what we call the resource allocation summary, local taxes, and government revenue, grants. Think about combining grants and government revenues, so their grants are basically another form of government revenue, and grants become a lot smaller. Charges for services, licenses, permits, fees, fines, miscellaneous revenue, transfers from other funds, and then fund balance available. You'll see in 26-27, there's no fund balance available because it's a 2-year biennium, so there's no beginning fund balance since we're doing a 2-year budget.
All the charges for services, that doesn't include building permits, right? Because that's a separate fund.
That'll be in fees. No, this doesn't include any building part fees. Most of the charges services you see there are overhead charges to the enterprise funds. That's the big chunk of those. And this is a little graph that you can't read because the colors look better. You'll see, yeah, it's going to focus now. Local taxes are, all local taxes, include franchise fees, are about 53% of the revenue. Charter services are about 25%, transfers are about 7.2%, and then money from other governments is about 11.5%. So here we got our money from various sources. This is what this spreadsheet, I mean, which you see every year, attempts to do is it puts down for each department, it takes the categories of revenue that we assign to them, i.e. the governmental and grants, charter services, etc. And we total that up for each department. That's the assigned revenue. And so if you go over to the right column on the total, you'll see the totals for each department. For example, admin services, for the next planning was about $9.1 million of assigned revenue. Most of that's the overhead charge. And you'll see down at the bottom, total assigned revenue for all departments is about $20.3 million. So we have discretionary revenue of about $37 million, which we don't assign to any department. And then we have about $10 million of fund balance, which is also considered discretionary revenue. So about $47 million over the next biennium for discretionary revenue. So what I do then is I take, you'll see I have each department in the general fund listed. You'll see them department number and department name. Then you'll see their proposed budget for 2025-27, the total budget for both years. Then I subtract out the revenue assigned. And then the right column says discretionary general fund for department. That's how much discretionary revenue it takes to run each department for the next biennium. You'll see that for police, we're about $19.35 million discretionary revenue over the next biennium. Fire is about 11.8. Municipal courts basically break even at the moment because of the change we're proposing tonight. And you can see what the other departments are doing. You'll see public safety is at about, about 70, almost 78% of the discretionary revenue. So for every dollar of discretionary revenue that we have, public safety uses about 78 cents of it. All right, so this is that right-hand column. This in a chart, you'll see police is just about half of the discretionary revenue, fire is slightly over a quarter, and then all the other departments are combined into slightly less than a quarter of the pie. You'll see planning takes about 3%, legislative and executive 2%, my department, administrative services 4%, library 4%, aquatics 3%, parks 6%, and recreation 1%.
So when you say we're a full service city, this is an important thing to look at, to say, what do we have to spend money on that somebody else doesn't?
Well, just to clarify, those are biennium numbers.
Yeah.
Those are totals over the biennium,
Yes.
not a per annum.
Per annum, those are totals over the biennium. So getting into the general fund departments themselves. All right. Legislative and executive. Revenue for this, most of the revenue comes from these general fund support services charges, which is what we always call the overhead. The one change in expense funds that we made is we budgeted funds for counselor travel and training. We've separated that into amounts for each counselor over the next biennium. And then biennium, each counselor and the mayor. So for each counselor, we budgeted one trip to the National League of Cities Conference and 2 LOC conferences. We budgeted that equivalent amount of training. If they want to do other training, then that's something to look at. The mayor has more funding due to attending other conferences such as the Oregon Mayors Association and some other stuff that she does. So she has more funding than the others. We've also included funding for up to 1 trip for 3 students involved with city boards and commissions, and a chaperone to attend the National League of Cities conferences once during the 2-year period. So that's it. There's about like $16,000 for that, for those 4 people to attend. Administrative services are probably going to go on in administrative services for a while, because for a lot of the staffing changes will be discussed. And revenues consist mostly of general fund support service charges and fees for utility billing related services and business licenses, providing most of the additional revenue. I'm going to start with professional services. That's not the one line I'm going to talk about for materials and services. As I'm going through here, if you've looked at the budget, you have any other questions on materials and services and any detail line items, go ahead and ask us. If we can't answer tonight, we'll get you the answer for next week. Professional services, we've included funding, a one-time expense for $62,900 for economic development expenses resulting from revenue from enterprise zone repayments carried over from the current fiscal year. If an industry that gets an enterprise tax break does not meet its conditions, it has to repay some of that money, and that money can only be used for certain economic development purposes. Right now, the city's got $62,900, so I don't lose track of it. I kept it in my professional services because then I see it every year. So we budget $11,000 for completion of the 2040 Vision and Action Plan in the first year of the biennium. That's hopefully we won't need all of that, but because I think the adoption is scheduled for July, but there's quite a bit of work to get done to wrap it up. $7,000 each year for continued translation services, English and Spanish. $15,000 each year for the annual goals and objective process. $15,000 for facilitation services each year. First year will be for recreational services facilitation with Cornelius Forest Grove School District Pacific University. The other participants are going to reimburse the city for about half of that $15,000 share of their costs. The second year, we don't have specific facilitation services in mind, but I'm assuming with the 2040 action plan and some other things that we're going to, council was going to look at, we're going to need some additional facilitation services for those years. So I put $15,000 in for those years.
Comments that number 4 on the list is the bulk of that expense for the facilitator.
Yes. Because it's not, it's not just a matter of holding the meeting on that Saturday. There's a lot of preparation work that the city manager and Jesse go through, and she'll interview a lot of people individually before we even get to the retreats and that. So she does a lot of groundwork before the retreat, and then there's quite a bit of work after the retreat, putting all the information together and having a couple work sessions with council.
I guess the only thing I would add is that might change some over the biennium with the completion of the 2040. There was a work session last night on that, and I think there was some conversation with the council about what does that kind of reconciliation process between 2040 and annual goals and objectives look like. And so look at that as that might be fluid.
Yeah.
So we'll just we got to see how that picture kind of paints itself, what that cost
And we
reflection might be.
don't need the money for the second year. It can be looked at. It's not a large expense, that you want to do a mid-year adjustment on per se, but it's something you can look at. I'm sure something else will come up in the meantime too. Last one, we budgeted about $209,000 in each year of the biennial budget for IT management services. I'll talk about that here when I talk about the IT manager in the next slide or two. Current intent is to contract all IT services with the exception of everyday PC desktop services and some software access issues that come up from employees. So we'll talk about that more when we get to the IT manager position. Next, we're going to go into the positions. Several staffing changes proposed for the departments. One of the proposed changes obviously also affects the legislative and executive department, but I put it all in here. If you read the budget message, you're probably going to get more information on this position change than what I actually put in the slides. First is to add the position of full-time assistant city manager, which will allow the current position of assistant city manager, finance director, be separated into 2 full-time positions of assistant city manager and finance director. Change is in response to council objective 2.6, which asks the staff to evaluate staff capacity in city administration. Underlying factors post change are workload volume. No other city, Washington County offers more services, and we have a lot of departments resulting in more direct reports for the city manager and also for the assistant city manager, finance director. This is tended to result in less responsiveness and less time for strategic planning. You just don't have the time sometimes to dig in as deeply as you would like to on some stuff. You just have to keep moving and be more reactive. And we hope to we hope to change some of that with the proposed change. Resiliency, adding this position will reduce the risk that many functions, the responsibility of one position. I.e., there's a lot of areas I have that will get split up between these 2 new positions, and it will allow the 3 positions to focus more on areas assigned to them and spend more time planning, and as I said, less time being reactive to things that come up. How the duties be divided is almost finalized. As with any change, probably look at some of the duties will be reviewed after the 2 positions have been in their respective positions while after the assistant city manager is on, the finance director is on, and you see how things are working. It may make sense to swap one function or another function between those 2 positions. And this will also allow the city manager, as the budget message says, to have less direct reports. He has 11 direct reports right now, 12, and it looks like maybe going down to 9, which is still a lot. But it's not just, when you're thinking of it, it's not just the 9 direct reports. These direct reports he has to work with, it's also the 7 city councilors. So there's quite a bit of time spent by the city manager managing department heads, plus it's working with the city council.
I just add one thing to that.
Sure.
Yes, and I don't know how on the next slide, is there more on that on the next slide? Or is that?
That's why I said that if you looked at the budget, you might want to.
Page 5 at the
Yeah.
bottom of page 5 on the budget message. Go ahead, Justin, sorry about that.
The only thing I would add, and thanks for raising that, Paul, is as I mentioned in my message, we did do some kind of comparative analytics with other cities on this. And the cities that we looked at were some of similar size, some larger, but the cities of similar size were Sherwood, Milwaukee, Newburgh, Lake Oswego, Oregon City, Wilsonville, and Tualatin. So and we didn't know this kind of going into it, but all of those cities have an assistant city manager. Cornelius has one. It's very similar to our position now. It's a tandem position, assistant city manager / finance director. We looked at some larger cities, and I don't know if this is necessarily comparable, but Hillsborough, they have an interesting structure where they have 3 assistant city managers, but each is responsible for various functions. And then the only other city we looked at was Tigard, which has assistant city manager, and then also kind of a unique position beside that position that's almost like a development director kind of position, but has some kind of additional responsibility. So anyways, I just wanted to add that we did do some kind of comparative analytics to Forest Grove. I would just kind of also mention that of all those municipalities, with the exception of maybe Hillsborough, because they actually have their own internet service, we offer more, if not more, we offer more services, if not the same, then more than any of those cities. So that's all.
In terms of FTE increases, is this a 1.0 increase or 0.5 or how are we looking?
It'd be a full-time assistant city manager and a full-time finance director, or it's just kind of one of the, as far as total FTE increases, this is kind of where we looked at, we're removing the potential removal of the interim city manager position. There'll be an IT manager, there'll be some savings there, and so some of that savings we're moving over to the assistant city manager. We tried to make the assistant city manager to the cost of the general fund as cost neutral as possible, between some savings that we're getting in some other areas, plus some of the allocations out to the appropriate departments that its position is scheduled to supervise.
guess another way, if I could add to that answer, is last year in the budget, the budget committee and the council approved a 0.5 accountant position. One of the reasons we're holding that position vacant is not a recognition that we don't need help in accounting. We do. I think it is trying to provide a recognition that for the finance director position, depending on what responsibilities are moved out from under that position and put over to the assistant city manager position, that will free up time for that finance director. And if there is enough free time that's kind of filled, that's freed up essentially to be able to really focus on the budget, accounting, municipal court, utility billing, et cetera, we're just kind of holding that until that potential structural change is in place to see if we still need that resource there. So there could potentially be a savings, but I don't want to create that expectation now because we just don't know. But we are keeping that position vacant. It's vacant right now, and we are keeping it vacant until pending the budget process, some structural changes to see if they come to fruition and what might happen to that position. If that makes sense. So that's the other position that has a nexus to this. But it's not clear what the outcome of that is going to be. And we probably won't know that for a little while, but we are being cautious in terms of what it looks like now.
Part-time accountants, it's staying as an authorized position, but we did not fund it this year, but it's funded in the second year of the plan.
So creating another executive level position require additional administrative support?
We don't believe so because depending on where the positions sit, depending on where they're located, which we haven't decided yet. I'm assuming the assistant city manager probably be around where Jesse is, and so Jamie will support those two positions. Finance director probably is going to have one of the administrative specialists downstairs. That's where it helps with some of the finance areas. Probably have that person get some administrative help to the finance director. So we think we spread it out with positions we already have.
Downstairs, we have administrative specialists for utility billing and also for municipal court.
And the general.
What's that?
The general.
And the general, yeah. And so we think that those can support the finance director. And in the same way that Jamie is supporting both Paul and I now, that would just move to the assistant city manager and the finance director would get that support downstairs.
And can you say anything about whether we're looking to bring in, is this a recruit from the outside or?
Now you asked, do we have candidates identified for each? No, we don't. There'll be open recruitment for both positions. And your other question, have any idea how long some of our more tenured people, e.g. me, will likely be around? We typically don't talk about tenured positions. That remains to be seen. If I wish to apply for either of the two positions that are coming up, I will apply and keep them openly. I've been totally aware of this since it's going in, or I will, more than likely, I will probably be looking towards retirement sometime early next year, depending on when these positions retire. I'm not saying officially I'm going to, because I have made up my mind, but I'm more looking in that direction.
Thank you for being candid. That has a huge impact on how everything rolls here. So appreciate that.
So the IT manager, probably actually longer than the assistant city manager. One proposal is to remove the IT manager. You can contract out our IT management services from technical management of the technical piece of the system, i.e. fire servers, storage arrays, firewalls, switches, for IT services while keeping the daily PC desktop functions in-house. Change being proposed. Difficulty of attracting good staff for one, and then retaining staff because they can earn more at other agencies. For example, our last IT manager went back to work for his former employee after a year. So proofread this a little. Like I said, this wasn't proofread that well. So including the IT manager, there are 4 currently authorized positions in IT. So after the IT manager goes, there'll be 3.
How many are staff right now?
Staff, we have 3 staff right now.
So you have 3 IT people,
3 IT people right now.
no manager currently.
No manager currently. Right now, Right now, I currently contract for temporary management services with a company that's helped us over the years. And they're actually, I went out for quotes for the management services, for the management services, technical services. I got 3 quotes. Talking to a fourth, they declined a quote because they use specific equipment and we don't use some of that specific equipment. They're specialized in that equipment, like say Cisco firewalls. If you don't have a Cisco firewall, they don't work on your firewalls. And so that's not something I can use. So I got 3 quotes. And so we've actually selected the firm that we're currently using for the temporary management contract. They've done several work for us over the years. And again, the full scope of the change is being negotiated, so the city fully understands what a contract service is, what projects will be new projects outside of the scope of the management contract. Because like right now, you know, we will go out and contract for certain portions of contracts right now because our IT manager didn't have the technical expertise to do some of it. So, you know, we're signing up for now for IT management services for like existing services, you know, keep things going. But if we're going to make a big change and do some other stuff, you know, that's technically could be outside of the scope of the contract. So we're just trying to figure out what's inside the scope of the contract and exactly what falls outside of the scope of the contract. So we kind of have a notion if we're going to make this kind of a change or look at this sort of stuff, it's going to be additional costs. And like I said, we currently contract out for several projects. It's hard for one person like the IT manager to keep up to date on everything that's happening with all the equipment that we've had to look at. And that's been one of the other issues that we've had. And the decision to propose this change took a while. It's a major shift in approach because we're going from having somebody in-house that does everything to a contract service that has to be managed. And contract manager will actually manage remaining people from a technical standpoint, while the assistant city manager will manage the IT contract plus the day-to-day, like vacations and that sort of other stuff for the people that remain, for the personnel side of it. And so, you know, currently the IT manager frequently calls a consultant to help solve issues with particular pieces of equipment as the consultant has more experience. And one of the questions Dave had is what happens when we have a crisis?
Like
Well,
yesterday.
We had a crisis yesterday, so
So what happened?
what?
So what happened?
We had an internal power failure.
I guess to resolve it though, we had to call in outside experts to resolve it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any network people in, so we call the consultant that we've had use temporary management. As soon as I called them and asked them, I told them we're dead in the water, we need this elevated. They had somebody right on the road heading out. Immediately came out, started working on the project. We got it up around 6 o'clock last night. Most was back up. The phone system, parts of the phone system were down today. It still might be a little bit of the phone system out on the computer side, but the phones are back up and working. And so it's, you know, and if we would have had this type of problem we had yesterday, the IT manager probably would have called these people in anyway, because as the power went up and then it went back down again. And so as it was going back up, everything was rebooting. When it went down at the same time, it was going back up, and that screwed up all the reboots. So there was multiple connections between multiple pieces of all the equipment got messed up. And so it took the person a while to unwind all that. So we would have had to bring somebody in anyway that had more network expertise than what our IT manager would have had. And so having the full-time, the contract with full-time consultants probably going to be no difference anyway. Plus whoever we signed the contract with, the consultants we were looking at, all of them would install monitoring software on our systems. So they're constantly monitoring the switches, the firewalls, the storage arrays, the servers, and they can tell if there's an issue with them back in their office right there. Lots of times they'll be able to remote and do something without us even knowing once the system happens to go down.
I mentioned something else about this.
Yeah.
Is it go on to the next slide or is this the slide? I just want to make sure I'm not going to say something that you were otherwise saying.
Hold on.
Oh, still have more to go.
It goes on. This is the long section of it.
Okay.
We also, one of the questions Dave asked was, what about long-term strategic planning? We talked about the long-term strategic planning as we were looking at doing this contract change, and we all acknowledge that if we were going to do a long-term strategic plan, we would hire a consultant anyway to help us with that plan, because the internal IT staff, while the IT manager will know how our system runs and how it works, he or she might not know what technology is out there, what's available, where the current trends are heading, what might be the best way to look at doing something, because they're not as up to date as, say, a consulting firm that's got a lot of people working for them, experts in all areas. They're getting constantly trained on things. So that we would have had to hire, like I said, the long-term strategic plan anyway to help us. And another question about would anybody would be looking at combining our IT with anybody else? I actually called some of the larger agencies in the county and said, hey, are you interested in hosting our network services as a service to us and then charging us for it? And at this point in time, they do not have the capability to provide that service, either with systems or staff.
They all doing their own internal work.
Yeah, most of them are, they're all doing their own internal work. And they have, even some of the larger agencies have some of the same hiring issues we do. The city of Hillsborough, which is much larger than us, pays much better than us. They had a network engineer manager position open for over a year before they were able to fill it. So those cities are also having hiring issues on some of their IT staff as well. It's not a fun world out there.
I guess just to I've talked with a lot of my colleagues of similar sized cities, and even some of the ones from larger cities, and we're just kind of seeing this industry-wide, especially with some of the networking systems types functions. Very difficult to recruit, very difficult to retain. Some of the tech functions, the kind of desktop type functions, you can see we can recruit and we can hire those positions. They typically do have a little bit higher turnover rate than normal
They don't
employees.
stay very long, do they?
Yeah, they don't.
So they want to get experience.
Yeah, they want to get experience and either kind of get promoted. If there's a career ladder at your agency, great. If there's not, then they're going to go to a different agency. And so we're seeing those positions within the city at that PC tech level. Those are turning over probably 1.5 to 2.5 years. That's just kind of standard rate. The other ones, we're just having a difficult time recruiting, period. We've had failed recruitments. We've seen this pattern, especially in other municipalities of our size. There was also a question about, have we looked at kind of combining with other cities? Oh, you were? Oh, okay. So can I jump the gun then?
You can.
Okay. There has been a conversation. There's a group called the BUG, the Broadband User Group. And the Broadband User Group is all the municipalities that kind of talk strategically about where we want IT broadband issues to kind of go. There has been some active discussion about kind of west side municipalities, Banks, North Plains, Cornelius, Forest Grove, less so Hillsborough, but maybe actively partnering on something. IT support, IT, anything IT. It's an active conversation. I will say, pardon the pun, it takes some bandwidth to kind of talk about that. There is some type of potential intergovernmental agreement. It's some type of potential cooperative, but it is an active discussion. Right now, it's kind of piecemeal. So you have Cornelius, for example, they're contracted out. You have Hillsborough doing a little bit of both. You have North Plains and Banks, they're contracting, and in those cases, they have a person, and it is kind of literally a person. And if that person goes, everything goes, kind of thing. And so there's a high risk factor associated with some of those smaller municipalities. It's just a challenge. So I think we're trying to kind of find innovative ways where we can look outside of the organization, find organizations that have quite a bit of bandwidth, quite a bit of depth, quite a bit of expertise, that are solid, that are stable, that know this, that can help us, that can bring kind of an outside perspective to it, and really kind of help us out, because we need some help.
So from my own technical background, the ideal scenario for me would be that you have this bug organization collectively hire 1 or 2 pretty high level people that are not doing desktop support. They're not running around unplugging and plugging switches back in.
That's
They're
exactly
more
the
doing
scope.
strategic planning oversight, looking, they are very much aware where the industry is heading technologically. They know what kind of things to be planning for.
And it's not,
And
it's
then
really,
you hire out all the day-to-day, the PC support and everything else to a selected set of firms as you're doing now, because that's not where you want to invest city dollars in, it's for a desktop service guy running around and reboot machines.
Right. and that's, I appreciate you mentioning that, because the conversation is really focused on that is the scope, right? Not the desk
No,
stuff, because that we can kind of do that.
not even
internally.
monitoring the switches and
Yeah.
servers, you can hire that out.
Switches, servers, hard,
It's the, where are we gonna be 5 years from now? What do we need to do now to get ready to move there? And how are we gonna work in lockstep so that we can get the best value for our dollars by kind of doing things together?
Yeah, and like Jesse said, there's an effort in Washington County, sorry, but, it's smaller agencies, like Hillsborough says, they're probably not interested in that effort. They'll probably stay on their own, right? And so, of the smaller agencies, we would actually be the biggest of the small agencies that would be looking at doing this, and so. And so it'd
That
be,
doesn't help.
yeah, no, and so it would be like for shared technology systems.
depends on the
Basically,
funding formula.
yeah, it depends on the funding part, but basically the smaller cities are smaller cities, and even some of like the fire districts, some of the smaller fire districts that have employees.
Yeah.
The systems are kind of looking for some help, but even if
What about
it
school
would head in that
districts?
direction, it's gonna take several years to put together, so we'd still do this in the interim, and, I'm proposing signing like a 1-year contract with renewable 1-year term, so let's say something like this became feasible, we're not locked into a long-term contract for what we're doing.
School
And different
districts
cities
are
wanna do
another
different amounts of stuff too.
problem. It occurs to me that school districts will have similar needs. They got campuses, they got buildings.
Chair, can I ask a question? Paul, some of the, you said you got 3 bids for this sort of temporary situation.
Well, 3 quotes for the ongoing
For the
services.
ongoing need for the lack of a manager, and I'm wondering if any of those quotes, or if there's sort of a line for contracting even the desktop type support in the interim as you sort of work on a longer term approach.
We talked, we went through when we went through the quoting process, there was one company only had like 2 support people in the Northwest. They gave me a relatively low price, but there's a reason for that. They only have 2 support people in the Northwest. And so it's, the other 2 firms, which are both based locally, they both said, keep the desktop support service yourself. You do not want to pay us for doing your everyday PC desktop support services. You can do it cheaper than they can do it, than they can hire people to do it. So they recommend that we keep the everyday stuff ourselves on the PCs. I know it sounds it, but it's what they have to pay in the market for. We can get the desktop. Plus, they have to send them out. Basically, they'd have to hire someone to be here, and we can do. And we did talk to one city that's contracted out all services, and they're happy, they're very pleased, but it's a similar size city to us. They have a person on staff to do the everyday stuff, and the person that manages their contract does 4 or 5 other different things. Like it's just, your job, if you ask me, but Cornelius is always contracted their IT services, but I don't know what their satisfaction level is and what they have right now. So I know Dave, the city manager is looking for different ways to do it.
It's just thin, very thin.
It's thin, so. And, like yesterday, like I said, we talked about the situation we had, it was very good because one of their senior network engineers came out, but they have experts at like other components of the system. They were actually on a Teams call, or one of the other experts remoted in and was helping and was doing some of the parts that he was an expert on, that the senior network had less experience in. So we were able to take the good experience from that firm and get the right people in the job for all components that we were having issues with. So. One of the other changes is they're proposing to move the GIS analyst back to the engineering department. Position will continue to focus on GIS, but at times we'll also do engineering inspections. As the person who we're moving back into engineering has previously done engineering inspections, so he used to be the engineering tech and half-time GIS, half-time engineering tech. So we moved him to GIS analyst, couple years ago. We're now moving back. He'll stay as the GIS analyst, but he'll do both. And he'll do both the engineering inspections when needed, plus GIS analyst. Public Works is going to start their process to convert its GIS data from its current network to the utilities network, like Light and Power has done, and Light Power is almost complete with its transition. I think they're about ready to roll it out. So I know Keith's been very pleased with the process of getting this on the utilities network. So I feel since we've hired the consultant in the last year, we've made leaps and bounds to what we've done in several of the prior years combined. So we're moving ahead fairly well with the GIS. And then, so we're going to start moving the Public Works data over it. So having a GIS analyst in that department will allow him to confer with the Public Works director and the consultant directly as a conversion of the utility networks being done. This is the approach we use for Light and Power, and like I said, it's been successful for them. And they're about to switch over to it, and then their staff will be able to take their maps out, their GIS maps out on their whatever electronic devices they're using there fairly soon.
I was gonna say, is that the goal that you're shooting for, is that all of the city employees will be able to use their portable devices to access them?
Yeah, all the ones that need it will be able to use them. We'll be able to do that. That's the goal of getting this done eventually. And plus we're also talking with the consultant about, okay, now that we've got Light Power done, our Public Works, we're also going to start looking about how can we also make this more public facing. Start getting some more stuff out there for the public to start looking at the GIS system. So
What are some examples of public facing features?
some of the basic property maps, some of the basic, some utilities maps, and then some of the stuff we can't put out there because of security issues. It's real hard for the terrorists to find where our substations actually are. When they can read it on a map instead of driving past them. So, sorry.
That's bright and sunny.
What?
Let me know when a good time would be to do a short bio break for everyone.
Yeah, let me finish this up real quick. Forget the first paragraph. It's just like copied and pasted it over from the last paragraph of the prior page. One question was about the removal of the water treatment plant engineering technician position that we proposed adding last year. We didn't want confusion between that position and the moving of the GIS analyst to the engineer, back to the engineering department. Water treatment plant operator / engineering tech was a hybrid position. We had to approve late last year, but we never filled it because the need for the position did not materialize. As we were able to hire sufficient water treatment plant operators to operate the water treatment plant, so we did not need that position. So like I said, we never filled it, and we're asking now to remove it. So the GIS analyst position that will remain has no duties of the water treatment plant. They strictly just do GIS duties plus engineering inspections. So and they'll, we kind of expect the engineering inspections to continue to increase as we're getting residential developments expected, to continue at a relatively similar pace for the next couple of years based on the number of buildable lots we have left. Inspections for summer overlay and curb projects are continuing, and we anticipating some increased inspections for some industrial developments that we're anticipating. So there will be some more inspection work coming up over the next couple of years. Already talked about the part-time accountant, so I'll talk about that. Like I said, we're going ahead. But one quick comment: we're going to give the finance director and the assistant city manager time to evaluate the position. Once the two positions are separate, they can kind of see how might things be best structured within the departments. So that's just like I said, it's going to take a little bit of time for them depending on when they get hired. Good time for a break.
Bye.
I know there's only one person.
There's two, but.
You look tired.
Yeah. Right to myself. We're not paying that 24%. Yeah, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I can't eat too much.
All I know is the water.
Living the dream?
Hey, I could, That department. Well. As they use that.
Oh.
And that'll be up there.
Maybe I shouldn't ask.
Well,
Sorry.
I think-
I got the
Still like.
It's really. No, it'd be myself. I'll be part of it. Well,
I'm gonna do that really quick. Hit a hole. It's now. Right side. I put you on the bank chair at the table. I can't.
You should make more popcorn. Where do you put your popcorn?
I know.
Now I got it. Now I'm gonna be called to offer my services. Volunteer my services.
Anyways,
Well, I do have a corporate. I do have a corporate. Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna make more popcorn. I'm gonna try to figure this out.
That's, when is that, tomorrow?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
Probably by June. Because, yeah. The guy
It's like once over, run down the rail to me. I'll tell you that.
Are you doing some now?
When I like, I made this one, I don't have to live like this. People still like it about 30 years. Yeah.
I got a headache.
We talked about it.
We'll make it easier. Oh, no.
That's where my office is here. That's ladies not that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure I was in insurance for a long time. Transitioning and I was running insurance, my favorite. Together, operation budgets for 12 years.
Did you see, did you see, this is what I'm like, I gotta do inside.
They spent all of that much.
One time it was the IT.
Yeah, so my budget.
Yeah, it's not my favorite job. So what do you want to do? Like,
Oh, yeah.
More as a.
Oh, okay, so there's a lot.
What am I doing? I should have this playing or something.
I never was, and then it was just bugging me, and then I was like, oh, it's a budget committee again. Whatever happened to that? I never heard the follow up after that one. You said that they were like really upset about my Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I meant to ask you the last time you met, and then I was like, yeah, and I was
Oh, I know now.
okay. Okay. I just wasn't sure what happened to that one.
If you like that, I can't take it.
Yeah.
It's on the agenda.
There's like on this, the park has just between two of us. Yeah.
No, I've been asking
The park has a
Oh.
So.
party.
Well, normally, I guess the question would be,
Get Jesse a gift.
depends on what fund source.
Copy DRA budget.
I also asked my dad today.
Well, I guess what we do. What would happen next, where this would go next, and then. Okay, this is what.
Oh, yeah.
That's what.
Well, hold on, I'll show you the.
What's this look like? Funding perspective.
Oh, yeah, my son is too.
Oh, I know. No, I'm kidding. I think.
I'll look it up. I'm going back to the office. I'll look it up. I'll email it. It's pretty much the LB ones.
So I think the last area was, I asked to put some.
Oh, yeah, we emailed.
Typically, these types of things are funded under market tax.
Probably. Yeah, that's what I would.
All right, 2-minute warning. We'll be starting up shortly. Get your popcorn now.
I think, you know.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah. I think that would be.
I'll bring it up during.
Depending on whatever comes first. But the last thing I remember was. Assessment unit.
All right, we're starting back up.
Oh, I thought I had 2 minutes.
Oh, well, you can keep doing that. Sorry. Soon as you can get the record button.
Are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
We were on 19. We're on municipal courts. We left off on municipal courts.
They're probably go.
Will you test your clicker? Zoom slideshow.
Here it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Over, Jamie, ready, we'll go.
I'm ready. Morning, Jamie.
I think so, yeah, we're good.
All right.
All right. Next section is municipal report. Quick one. We operate on, of course, for municipal courts, we get the first $30,000 of fine revenue for Cornelius, and that's split 50/50 afterwards. Total court revenues is projected to remain flat. The number of citations issued by Cornelius has continued to decline. The number of citations issued by Forest Grove has remained flat. Revenue be declining except for collection of prior citations that are turned over to collection agency, the Department of Revenue. But even those collection receipts are showing signs to slow down. One change we did make is wasn't making the court, but also affects administrative services. I put it here. The administrative specialist in court is going to allocate that 50% to court, 50% to administrative services to reflect where the person's time is actually being spent. This person is cross-trained in some utility billing functions and helps frequently the utility billing counter and answering phones for utility billing. But now the court volumes now we're using her. We need more staff. Additional staff utility billing. This is one way to get that additional staff by carrying that person's court. Going, I thought her software apparently. We know it's more important. I know that. Library, come on, Colleen. Have the department heads come up as we get to their sections. I'll go through my notes and then if there's questions or discussion, then Jesse may take the question depending on. Jesse's been working hard with the other county managers and the library people on the new library stuff. He's enjoying it immensely. Washington County, WCCLS is the major source of funding for the library and is proposed to increase by 1% in the next fiscal year 25 and 26. The revenues for 26, 27 are not known. The county is considering the local option levy on the November 2025 ballot. However, for the purposes of preparing this budget, we've assumed receiving only a 1% increase for both years, because right now that's kind of the best information that we have and based on historical.
So it used to be more like 3%.
Yeah, we had traditionally received about 3% from the county for years. But now that they're into their budget issues, they've cut down that 3% in the last few years to 1%. But in some years, prior years where property taxes were sometimes well above the amount projected, the county would give the libraries additional funding known as pool 2 money. And that's where that thing came with pool 2 money came from. But there's not been pool 2 money distributed for several years now because it's close to 10 years. And so
Well, the county's not so much financial challenge right now. They probably split the general fund.
So they've taken essentially, what used to be a 3% increase every year from the general fund to WCCLS. They flattened that down to 1%. And so if you look at for the impact for Forest Grove, we get about $1 million every year from WCCLS from the county for the library budget. So the difference between 3% and 1% is about $20,000 per year. And that started not last fiscal year, but the fiscal year before that. You have a chart. Okay.
we've been backfilling the reduction in WCCLS funds with city general fund dollars, which again will impact the remainder of the general fund budget. I showed you a table last year and I've updated this table for this year, showing the impact of the reduced revenue. So There's actual 21, actual 22, budgeted 23, 24, budgeted 24, 25. The budgeted for all intents and purposes for WCCLS revenue is the same as what we actually got. So you'll see we still got the 3% between 21 and 20, between years 21 and 22 and 22, 23. From years 23 to years, from that next year, 23 to 24, we got a 1%. We're getting a 1% for this year. And then you'll see the last column is the biennial budget where there's 2 years combined. And so I've assumed a 1% increase from 25 to 26, and then I take it to 26, calculate the number, and added another 1% to that number. So that would give us about $1.983 million for the next biennium from WCCLS based on 1% increases. And then there's the expenditures. You'll see the budgeted expenditures for the library for the next 2 years are $3.5 million, which would mean city funding of $1.5 million. You can see how the percentages have been going up. The city's funding percentages over the past 21, 22, it's gone from 30% to the next year's budget. Next year's biennium, if the county just gave 1% to the second year, we'd be at 44%, 56% from the county, 44% from the city. And you'll see the bottom line, you'll see the bottom of the chart on the bottom, which shows if we would have got the 3% the whole time, there is what we would have received in the next biennium instead of the 1.9 million we're getting, we would have 2.1 million. So makes a difference, and it makes a difference quickly because that number is compounded each year. So what we did is we didn't ask the library to absorb all the increase, but we asked the library to propose $40,000 reduced funding for the normal increase over the 2-year period to make up for the loss of funding.
So it's not that they're reducing 40,000, they're showing $40,000 less.
Of an increase.
Or less of an increase.
Okay.
Is what we're asking, what we asked them to do.
Got
And so right now, I've got the money coming out of the reduction of the remaining pool 2 monies. There was about $18,000 left in that even after 10 years. And then the 10% reduction in materials expenses for each of the next 2 years, which is $38,000. We said that was close enough. And we, in the general fund, it's making up the difference between the 40 and the 38.
So if I understand it right, the big picture is we're backfilling where the Wiggles funds are falling shorter than they used to be.
Mhm.
We're doing it, and we're reducing our expenditures by cutting back on our material budget.
I think Colleen is going to probably want to potentially look at that and evaluate it, and potentially change. So the library reviewing changing. Right now, the library has a vacant full-time library assistant. Right now, they're looking at changing that into 2 half-time assistants to help with scheduling flexibility. Right now, with every person just being about full-time, a lot of them, they tend to have less scheduling flexibility if they had more part-time. This will also save about $12,000 a year in wages and benefits, which could be used to absorb part of that reduction in funding instead of potentially reducing materials line items. Colleen's probably going to come up with a different formula for the 40. But the library's budget will be reviewed at the end of the first year of the 2-year budget period based on the outcome of the county's proposed levy and the proposed new funding allocation that may come about if the new levy passes. So we're not sure how the second year could look. We could get more revenue if it passes. So we're just not.
If I could maybe add to that briefly, the county actually right now is doing polling. This is going to be the second of 3 polls on a proposed levy increase of 15 cents for WCCLS. After these poll results come in, I think there's the reason that the county is looking at polling 3 times is just kind of this economic uncertainty that's out there. So we're seeing how that might affect what a potential replacement levy for the libraries would look like. The board is going to reconsider in August whether they want to do a 10 or a 15-cent increase. They are leaning toward a 15-cent increase if the polling results sustain it. At that point, they're going to do a 3rd and final poll before a final vote from the county on whether to put it on the ballot and at what rate. The final vote to put it on the ballot has to be in August in time for the November election, but there will be a third poll. And so in terms of kind of like the other thing that's going on parallel to this process, and Colleen knows the details much better than I do, is a governance and funding study. And the governance and funding study is being done by all of WCCLS's partners. Marina and Company is the consultant that's been hired. All of WCCLS partners include all the municipalities and also Martin Homes, Cedar Hills, County Nonprofits, and Aloha. So all the partners are involved in this process. They are talking about some changes. But none of those are going to be known until, and all of these are kind of tied to the levy. So all these efforts are kind of intertwined. That's part of the reason that in this vacancy that we have currently, we're just kind of pausing on that. We're not like pausing the expenses of it, we're just pausing the hiring of it. So the expenses of it are in the budget, and those expenses could be used for temporary services, whether with existing employees or maybe even hiring temporary employees to maintain our level of service. But we really do need to get a clearer picture after November before we look at potentially a full-time bona fide offer to an employee. We need to know it has a stable funding source. The levy doesn't pass, I think there's a big question mark about what WCCLS would do the next year, what the county would do the next year. The trend has been a 1% increase, but I think Colleen would probably agree with me that they've also hinted at flat, which would be the same amount as last year. And so if that's the case, then the compounded results that you just saw earlier that Paul showed, they get even more dramatic. And when you take a percent off of $1 million, it can be significant. I mean, it's automatically $10,000. And if you compound it over the years, that compounds to 20 and then to 40 and then to 80. So it's just something to kind of consider. Colleen's been going to all the meetings. I've been going to the meetings that I can. We've been very tuned into it. And that's not all I have.
So the budget, as we are currently considering it, would allow you to maintain current levels of service, Colleen, is that right?
Yes, as Jesse said, we're considering some temporary something until we know the outcome of the levy, but yes.
We don't think we're in a reduced service scenario yet. And, you know, I think I don't know what the term would be in November, but I think we're watching it closely, and the board is trying to make steps to assure that there would not be a reduction in service.
That's great. I think that our community considers our library to be one of the shining stars. Certainly wouldn't want to lead with cutting services there if we could help it.
Yeah, like I said, the changes on the prior page were mine and not so much the libraries as the here from the library in time. So I made those first decisions on where to make those changes. So it's you're calling and I'll be having discussions over the next couple of weeks. Don't tell me where, I'll do it myself. So
Well, some of these we didn't know about the first initial meetings. The position was filled.
yeah, this was filled that the person left. So Colleen and I'll be discussing some stuff and we may tweak with some line items over the next couple of weeks. Are there any questions for Colleen? Questions? Or any questions of what in general? The library?
Yeah, have lots of support here.
All right, next couple of departments will be Ann.
Shining star.
That's my favorite. It's professional.
All right, on the aquatic center. Tons of changes. The revenue is based on projected activity for next year based on the current fee structure, which will probably include an increased cost of living fee for the current city code while we're awaiting the results of the recreation fee study. City has historically worked on the unwritten policy of collecting, trying to recover approximately 50% of the operating costs, not including major maintenance costs, as that would be very difficult to recover. Parks and Recreation fee study, which in inflation could change the projected revenue activity depending on the results of the study and any changes in cost recovery policy that the council may adopt. And also when the council may decide to put the results of that fee study into effect. As I said, we did a risk assessment of the aquatic center over the last 18 months. It consisted of an initial assessment and then a follow-up visit by the consultant. Staff's implemented many of the recommended changes. It took current staff time or relatively small amounts of funding to implement. One recommendation is requiring additional funding. Requires additional funding is to increase the number of training hours for lifeguards and instructors. Proposed budget includes adding an additional 600 hours each year for additional training. That will give us 2 additional hours of training per month for the projected number of staff. That we have, which will give us to 3 hours a month of total training, which is getting us kind of around the county area, around the average schools in the area, but not quite up to the recommended standard. But I mean, the recommended standards are, they're just a recommended standard, but we are looking at substantially increasing the training for the lifeguards. So, and any questions?
Was there
on
any particular risk that we were worried about that prompted the risk assessment? Or was it just a routine thing that we did?
We hadn't done one for a while, and it's good to do something. It's good to do a risk assessment at a facility like the aquatic center because there are a lot of inherent risks that can happen quickly in all sorts of types of situations. Someone can just fall in face plants, and have heart attacks, and other things, and it's just. And you also want to make sure that the staff, and I can talk a bit better about this thing. The staff, when they're on duty, they have a emergency kind of 2 things. One, they're watching the swimmers in the pool. They're also keeping their mind on what happens if an emergency occurs. What do I do? And so, I don't know, want to add anything to that, Ann?
Yes, and, it's just good practice to take a look inside of your operations, using an outside consultant to do an assessment periodically. And yeah, we hire a lot of very young staff. Our turnover's pretty quick because of that. It's not unlike any other aquatic center though. And training is a really important factor for making sure that these young people know how to respond appropriately in an incident.
How often do we do these risk assessments, or is there a process, like, do we follow, like, is there policy that says, hey, every 5 years, we're gonna evaluate, or every 10 years? And is that something we need to?
This is about one of the first ones since I've been here, as long as I've been here, but there's probably something that at a facility like this, we need to do more regularly. Probably, I would say, maybe a 5-year type cycle on.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's like.
My thought is you could probably do something like this commensurate with the master plan. Every time you do a master plan, go do an assessment of the pool, make it part of that process, you could roll it into the funding source.
Yeah.
It just becomes part of it, and you do a master plan, generally speaking, every 5 to 7 years. 5 to 10 years.
I think too, like for anything else, like inventory, like facility too, like, I don't know, anyways, I think just roll it all in together.
And on the aquatic center, we do have some major maintenance projects budgeted over the next 2 years, but we put those in the major maintenance fund, so we'll be talking about those next week. Or the week following. Major maintenance fund.
Sure.
Risk assessment also makes me think about insurance, and I'm wondering if it involves, involved in evaluation to bring back to our insurers about whether or not there are opportunities to lower risk and maybe even,
We were working with City County Insurance with they have risk management staff, besides the consultant, who is more versed in the aquatic center than the risk management staff for CIS. We were working with CIS on this as well, so they're aware of aware of what we've done.
And any recommendations for lowering insurance costs, or is that not part of?
Probably not so much, it's probably more, only doing the hour of training, if we're probably, by increasing it up to 3, we're probably lowering the risk of more insurance premium increases without having what they might consider sufficient training.
Do we have a separate policy for the aquatic center that covers its unique risks, or is it just?
No, it's just part of the general. I mean, each department can have specific premiums attached to it. Say, for example, fire department, there's no cost for additional firefighters, but for each additional police officer you hire, your liability insurance goes up like $1,200 for each officer, additional officer you have on staff. So there are additional liability premiums associated specifically with additional police officers. They're all sort of somewhat priced differently depending on what you're looking at. Yeah, there's no other questions. That will go into parks. And so recreation user fees are for fields and park shelter rentals and lighting for those fields. Those are being reviewed as part of the Parks and Recreation user fee study. Probably one of the more fun areas Ant's having as part of the fee study. Council objective 2.6, what they asked us to look at city administration staffing, also wanted us to look at parks maintenance staffing. After reviewing the staffing and having budget several meetings with hand, decision was made to recommend that we start a new master plan this year, and that would include reviewing staff required for any new parks facilities that would be added. The decision to add more facilities would also be tied to the maintenance required for that facility. While the master plan is being done, even though there's other parks in the pipeline, we decided we would only add Eastside Park, which is just nearing completion. It would have been completed except for the tree falling over. So they had to go back through and redesign because the tree that was in the center of the park fell over and sort of messed up their design. The Eastside Park would be the only park that would be added as Ann felt the current staff could handle the addition of that park with the other maintenance requirements, but couldn't take on any more. Currently, the Parks Department still uses several older trucks from new departments. From other departments, we were able to, some of the last of the ARPA money that was all spent up on December 31st, we were able to buy a Ford F-150 Lightning truck for the Parks Maintenance Supervisor, which I think he really likes. So, and we're also proposing this year to purchase another new truck for the department, so we can get rid of one of the older trucks. And we're not going to use general fund money, but we have another fund called Trail System Fund, and we're going to use $55,000 of that money and transfer that to the equipment fund for the purchase of the truck. Last year we bought a Bobcat, so part of what we do is they hold the Bobcat around over the trail, so this truck will be used to help hold the Bobcat around. And it's an allowed purchase of the trail system. Source of the trail system fund money is about one of the only cities that has this. When waste management's rate of return is over a certain percent, the city gets everything above that certain percent. And so the money is the accumulated excess money waste management has earned over their allowable rate of return. Equipment fund charges are increasing by about $24,000. Part of that is because the new equipment is being purchased, so you add more maintenance to the system, you add more insurance, and you also add starting to build replacement funds for those trucks when they are due to be replaced in 10 to 12 years. So it's trying to keep general pickup trucks for at least 10 years, but we always look at them, and if they're holding up, we'll generally keep them for some additional years. We don't just replace something because it says here's the actual replacement time. About the exception being in police patrol vehicles. We find the Ford Explorers we get about 5 good years out of, but after that the maintenance starts adding up. So we do replace the police patrol vehicles as we got them scheduled in the equipment replacement. So by increasing the equipment fund charges, we will have enough money to ensure that sufficient replacement funds are available and the new equipment scheduled to be replaced. All I have, any questions on parks?
What is the council schedule for reviewing the?
So, can I answer?
Sure.
You want to answer?
Yep, go ahead.
So we, the Parks and Rec Commission asked the council to take a look at just
Rentals.
the rentals portion of it. So we had a few meetings, the Parks and Rec liaison, Counselor Marshall, myself, Jesse, and Tractor Lane. We're looking at having a listening session. We're gonna do a meeting poll June 2nd or 3rd, one of those options. And we'll listen, and then we're gonna have a work session later, like the end of June. Basically, our template. It's June.
Well, it feels
June
like that-
Jesse's looking for the schedule. June 23rd.
June 23rd.
I know it's gonna be.
No, excuse me, June 9th.
June
June 9th. June 9th.
Oh, we did get it on.
Yeah, June 9th, sorry.
Okay, we got it for June 9th.
I know
That's
that's
right.
gonna be, that's really for the.
Yeah, and it's not a debate. We're, we're just gonna try to.
Yeah, but, I mean, it feels like that's gonna be a similar dilemma as like a levy where, you know, there's this scenario planning, so is your current budget assume no increase in fees, or what are you assuming that currently?
The current budget includes the current fee structure as is set by the council, and right now that includes a moratorium on the rental fees, but not the lighting fees.
So for all of the aquatic fees and the light fees and other fees, those would be increasing the normal percentage rate that we would propose. The one that as Paul mentioned, and you could add to this, so there's a moratorium on is the field rental fees.
Right.
Just the field rental fees. We still do charge a lighting charge. So for the expense associated with lighting, if it's at night, we still administer that fee. The use of the field itself, however, is not being charged.
So I think a follow-up question to Counselor Schimels is, once this is resolved, and then let's say there is a change in the rental fee, then we will just, I mean, what will we do budget-wise? You know, I think I know the answer, no. We'll let you answer. Well, I'm gonna make more.
Yeah,
Well, as I say with all general fund fees, part of it, I mean, you can set the fee, but part of it is based on volume and how many actual field rentals you have, and depending on what field rental you may set, that may change whether somebody can rent fields from you or not. So that's where we're gonna kind of look at hand on the consultant, let's kind of say, you know, depending on what the fee may be proposed, or are we potentially pricing people elsewhere? And so that, you know, that's always part of the consideration is some services like this where there may be could be other limited options, they still do have potential alternatives.
I think maybe the other way to answer that is right now, there's no revenue associated with field rentals. So if the fee is implemented by the council and administered, it's likely that the revenues that would come in would be more than what revenue is right now.
But it still hasn't been, I mean, we still haven't over the years, don't really get enough fee rental to shift the needle a lot on what we may be doing. What we may be doing for the Parks Department, because if you look at the discretionary revenue for parks, there's very little discretionary revenue. I mean, the parks is almost the Parks Division itself is almost 100% to general fund discretionary revenue.
It's an interesting answer that, yeah, I'm interested in, as we go through that conversation in a couple months, is what do you need that money for? Relative to the value proposition of the club sports. So what's the trade-off?
Some of the grass fields that the rec teams may use require more upkeep.
Yeah, well, that's could serve as a baseline. What is the real cost of that? There's a value proposition beyond the actual maintenance. Paying for recreation or not to be answered here. I'm just I'm afraid this is going to be a tough one.
I guess, you know, I guess I would want to understand, do you want Director Lane to tell us the overall cost of the upkeep of those rental facilities? And is that what would help you, like, as we're planning this work session on June 9th, like, explain how we got where we are in the fee structure and what we're, the compromise, that we're gonna try to find. And I guess, don't answer that now, but if there's things that you need from staff to help you come to resolve this, dilemma, then that would be great to know, so we can help build that in the presentation. But we can, and we can talk about that at that work session, not from here. Sorry, just skip that over.
Question on parts, we'll move on to recreation. So the budgeted revenue for this division includes $315,000 of planning and recreation program revenue, which would include estimated scholarship payments from the Fund for All Fund, and then $103,000 of property taxes, which we allocated based as part of the decision when we did the local option levy that we would give recreation about $50,000 starting out, then increase it by about $1,000 a year for supplies and other programs. And so right now we do 51 and 52 for the total of 103. There's two types of expenses for this division. There's the direct expenses of running the recreation program and the administrative expenses of planning and managing the recreation programs in the division itself. The coming biennial budget, the recreation division has been instructed that the cost of the programs are not to exceed the revenue, the direct revenue for those programs. That way there's no general fund subsidy to these programs at the current time. This may change after the fee study is completed and the council decides what, if any, subsidies might be made available for recreation programs. Right now, they're supposed to run into this. There's no general fund subsidy being provided for the direct expenses of the program.
So when you say the cost of the program, you're talking about the cost of running the program that's been planned already.
Hiring the staff, the basic supplies to run this program itself, if they have to rent a facility, do the program, and the cost of renting the facility, those kind of direct expenses have to be fully covered by the direct revenue.
But the expense of staff involved.
Yeah, like for Ann's time and for the administrative specialist time, some of her time's allocated. For Cody's time, which is covered, for the recreation coordinator, whose time's covered by the levy, those will be considered the administrative costs for planning and managing. Okay. Back up. Police. Okay, as we said earlier, the police personnel expenditures are not known as the police association contracts being negotiated. Two officers are being partially funded by the 3 years COPS grant. I mean, most of the next second, third year of the grant will essentially cover the next 2 fiscal years. They don't line up perfectly because you have to go by when the officers start their employment. Proposed budget also includes school resource officer reimbursement. And that's calculated for 1/2 of the 2 years of the officer's wages and benefits who's assigned as the school resource officer for 9 months of the fiscal year. So you can follow that. So basically 1/2 of the salary times 9 months, times nine of the 12 months is what the school district gets.
Times 0.5.
Yes. 0.5 of the salary benefits times 9/12. That's what the school resource reimbursement is.
9/24.
Yep. Okay, the local option levy has projected adding 2 police officers in fiscal year 25, not 26, 27, excuse me. That's why I have to review this stuff. Fix that. 627. Upon reviewing the projection That projection, staff's instead of proposing adding one officer starting July 1, 2025, and the second officer starting July 1st, 2027. The cost of this approach is about the same as the local option levy approach. You've got a little bit more money because of the step increase. There's 1 and 2, but not much. But it gets another officer out on patrol earlier. And I think the place that was their preference was if they could, was to get that one officer out on patrol earlier. So, only other item to note is the police department's budget is increasing. Equipment fund charges are increasing to cover the reflecting costs, increasing costs of operating and maintaining the police vehicles. And I don't want to add anything about the police officer position or not. Any questions?
How many officers do we have on patrol now?
So on paper, we're technically fully staffed, but we have 2 officers in background. 1 officer going to the police academy next week and 2 in training. So right now we have 19 officers on patrol. And 1 on military duty.
I'm gonna cling to Henry's optimism. But even so, that you move into that building, what's your,
The bond passes, I'd say in 28 sometimes 28.
so, I mean, given what I've learned very quickly in a short few months, I would have expected to see some paragraph on some improvement to the building to address health, occupational health hazards. In that timeframe. And this is where I'm new to the sources and uses, what sources can be used for that purpose.
So I think when we get to the major maintenance fund, that would, we can look at that under the major maintenance fund. What's another fund that would be applicable to make improvements to the existing facility?
The general fund.
General fund, CIP excise?
Now, there's not enough in there to do squat.
So I think when we get to the major maintenance fund, can we maybe raise that again and kind of contextualize the conversation with that? The other one is, as Paul mentioned, is the general fund itself. I think one of the questions that kind of comes up is what improvements, what would those improvements kind of look like? What would that cost be? Do you want to make those in a short, kind of, what's the time frame environment in which to make those kind of improvements? What's the long-term perspectives toward possibly going back out on another ballot? And if so, when? I think another question is do we want to do some polling about, if it doesn't pass, do some polling about why not? What needs to be addressed? What were the major points? Those kinds of things. So I think Councilor Schimmel, a lot of these issues are gonna, depending on the outcome of what happens, a lot of these questions are gonna pop up, including what some of the investments in the facility may be in the short term. We did, I'll refresh my memory, we did, and Henry, maybe you remember, we did look at,
Some of the HVAC, we did put a new condenser on the building.
we put a new condenser on it, we did some improvements to the roof, there was some remodeling inside that occurred.
Yeah.
There's still some conditions that are clearly not optimal, especially in the summertime, correct me if I'm wrong. And so I think we'd have to look at, some issues there.
Fixing some of it's gonna require some major expenses too. I mean, it's not gonna be like a $10,000-$20,000 solution on the HVAC. To kind of, summer will get hot in there, we put the condenser in, that's helped some. And so it's getting to be one of these older buildings that's gonna start taking a lot of money to keep up. So it's like Jesse said, the question is, what would you do if the levy passes? What would you do, would be worth doing over the next 2 years? Next 2 years to make changes in there, or if it doesn't pass, then how long do you think you still might be in there? And then again, would that change the calculus on what type of improvements you may or may not want to make? I mean, if you're going to use a major maintenance fund, you're coming down to decisions between what you may want to do in the police building versus what you may want to do with the aquatic center.
Well, I specifically used the phrase health, or whatever phrase would describe an imminent or real existing health hazard that hampers either contribute to someone's poor health and cause a claim, or there's already people being displaced to less productive space, so does that hamper service level? And where I'm wanting to be aggressive is, I would guess that this has been the same rationale for maybe 15 years now, because I've heard it go back that far. So I'm just declaring like enough is enough for officers to suffer. And I mean, I give it credit to his personality for the retention of folks, but you know, I just, as an employer, I can't stand to expose folks to a harmful work environment. So I'm gonna cling to the optimism that it passes, but even if it does, we have to address that those immediate health hazards regardless. I don't care what it costs.
But I think reframing kind of the question potentially, I think there's been so much focus on the police facility and on the bond. I'll just be candid. I'm not sure that we have really kind of vetted internally the question about, even if the bond passes, are there improvements that need to be made to the building between now and when it's constructed? And I think that's a conversation we need to have. We haven't had that conversation. We've had parts of that conversation, and we've made improvements to the facility recently, especially with regard to the roof and with regard to some portions of the HVAC. But we do need to get some more information and bring that back. We haven't had that kind of thorough conversation because we've been just candidly really focused on this. So let's have the conversation, and we need to bring something back on this. And I think it's a legitimate point. I'd like to know a little bit more about what are the working conditions in the summer, how that is impacting staff, if it is impacting staff, under what conditions, and then some proposed improvements associated with it. So we'll have that conversation.
Now, the same risk assessment you're referring to on the school,
Yeah.
would carry over. It now it's a different complex, but and it's ultimately, well, one about, you know, our personal responsibility for the health of our staff, but also for our liability.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing it up.
What is slated to become of the building after it's vacated?
So I can hear you say that if you want.
This one's probably more.
I don't know about that. There's been some conversations about what to do with the facility. If it does pass, there hasn't been any final decisions made because
Eventually it will be vacated.
it's that.
Eventually it will be
Yeah,
vacated.
you know, I think there's been some conversations. We did have a market assessment done for the building, both for leasing potential and just kind of a market assessment for sale potential, just looking at kind of all of the options. We've had internal discussions about potentially repurposing, if so, for what purpose, if there was any city departments that needed it, if so, what departments and for what. So there's been a lot of kind of conversation. There's been some conversation about what's an opportunity to do with that site. Is there an opportunity kind of outside the box of that building and another community need that might be identified that you could use that for? It's a pretty good location.
But a renewal agency would like to buy it.
Well, there was talks about potentially the URA. I think there's kind of been a lot of, you know, look-see and talk about those options. But it's kind of also a little bit difficult to plan for that in the absence of, you know, it's currently occupied, right? And
We
so,
just don't know it's the answer.
yeah, so we don't, there's no final preferred alternative yet. But I think that would be a conversation with council though, for sure, and with the community.
I think the couple are two questions. It's the investment you would put into, let's say, for the next few years. You need to do that anyways to make it serviceable. The HVAC, the roof. And you don't have to do any remodeling or let the leaser do remodeling, but you gotta address the occupation or.
I think if we identify what those improvements could be, I don't, Potentially. Want to kind of consult with a real estate agent.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that if there's some, if we think it's serviceable, it's not money we're throwing away.
Yeah, it could potentially raise the value for
For
sure.
example, we put $105,000 police roof recently, which we can hopefully get us by another 4 or 5 years, and it's gonna take probably about another 800,000 to $1 million to replace that roof. So there are some significant costs coming up, but we did, I mean, there were some leaks during times when it was raining, and so we got those all sealed up now. So, there are, and the library and the police share a little bit of infrastructure between the two buildings, so if you were gonna sell it, you'd have to address that issue, and so there's all kinds of somewhat unknown costs that would be associated with that. And it's, I don't know, you've been in it, I'm sure, it's not the most pleasantly laid out building, and the architects, it would take quite a bit of expense to remodel it. So it's for an alternative use, so it's just something to look at for the future. Questions, we'll on fire.
What we said for Jim.
Nah, it's okay. I can answer the questions. All right, so the resources, city's been paying 88%, the district 12% of the operating costs. The costs are operating costs are based on a 4-year.
Jim is actually on and he does have his hand raised. Jim, can I?
Jim, feeling better?
Well, I'm not sure I'm feeling much better, but I'm live and here on online.
All right.
Yeah. If need be.
All right, any questions, we'll address them. The costs are based on a 5-year rolling average. The operating costs for the district will increase from 12 to 12.4% on July 1st, 2025. 0.4% may not sound like a lot, but $30,000 of additional expenses the rural fire district will be paying for those operating costs. The district share expenses projected to be a little over $1.8 million over the next 2 years. We've not budgeted any revenue from the city of Cornelius for the coming biennium, as Cornelius has hired its own fire chief. There may be some revenue from other services, but those potential services are still being discussed. And so, like I said, no revenue budget for Cornelius over the next biennium. Firefighters will be receiving 4% cost of living increases over each of the next 2 years. And as we projected in the local option levy, we are proposing adding 3 firefighters as of July 1st, 2025, which will give the department 7 firefighters on each shift. This will increase the frequency of the department being able to respond to 2 simultaneous calls from 45% to about 90% of the time, according to the chief. And the ability to frequently staff 2 apparatus was one of the primary outcomes of increasing the local option levy that we pull the residents, and also as the busiest station measured by calls for firefighter. This will also have the benefit of reducing the number of calls per firefighter. Some firefighters may not have to respond to a single call if they're, depending on what the call is, and they just stay back at the station and be doing other stuff. A lot of times they do their own calls in a 24-hour period. A little bit more on fire. Next page. Genie button working.
Sorry. Is it working?
There it goes. Expenses, tools, 50/50 line item. It's called this because the expenses are considered capital outlay for billing purposes to the fire district. They vary from year to year depending on the amounts to be purchased. Ongoing annual items we buy include turnouts and other safety equipment, replacement pagers, rescue replacement and payments for the heart monitor leases. We've leased the current heart monitors for 10 years. New items proposed for, well, not new so much, but we're proposing carrying over $25,000 for location study for a northern fire station, budgeting $20,000 for replacement of the remaining light fixtures and LED fixtures. There are some other maintenance items we're proposing budgeting in two other funds that we'll discuss next week. Vehicle maintenance and operating supplies are being increased by $10,000 in fiscal year 25-26, and an additional $11,000 in 26-27 to better reflect the actual cost of maintenance of the apparatus. So that's the fire operations side. And while we got Jim online, we might skip ahead and do the first real quick. But is there any questions on the fire department itself before we get to the replacement fund?
At one point, there was verbiage about delaying the hire of our,
That was last year.
was that a cut and paste thing?
What we considered last year was
So last year, what we considered was trying to move them up actually 6 months in the schedule. And we were gonna look at assessment for January 1st of this year.
We're talking about the 3 firefighters?
The 3
Yeah.
I'm
firefighters.
talking about the chief. There was.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
we'll talk about that in a second. I can talk about it now. There's the fire chief and then the organizational structure. Currently, there's 3 what we call division chief positions. There's training and
it's not the fire.
operations and then the fire marshal. Those aren't chief, those aren't the fire chief, they're
The
division
chiefs, but
chief.
not the chief.
And one of the division chiefs, there's too many chiefs now. One of the chief's positions is vacant. Division chief's position is vacant. So we're going to keep that position vacant while we go through the things with Cornelius.
So
Okay.
the big picture, not to belabor this, is in 2010, we signed an agreement with Cornelius to offer fire chief services, okay, and fire management services. In 2015, we signed a contract with Gaston to offer fire management services. Over the course of that timeframe, between 2010 and today, 2025, essentially a position was not necessarily added, but taken kind of out of one of the shifts. And over time, it was reclassified into a division chief position. And that division chief position became essentially responsible for volunteers, training, and essentially the organization was organized so that one division chief would manage Gaston, one would do Cornelius, and one would do Forest Grove. Each would have one of the various stations. There were other duties along with that. And now what we're looking at is we're looking at a change structure. Fire, Cornelius is hiring their own fire chief. They tripled their levy. Gaston no longer has an IGA with us. We still have an IGA kind of on paper with Cornelius, but we can expect that to be going away as the Cornelius fire chief becomes kind of fully up to speed. And so it's just kind of, we have to look at the organization internally and ask ourselves, how does this position still fit? If it does, what does that look like? What's the volume of work, the complexity of the work, the nature of the work? Kind of what's left after this kind of change over the last 3 to 4 years since Gaston and Cornelius.
That makes sense. I didn't appreciate that there was a difference between division chief and the chief,
Yeah.
but I thought we were talking about, or the chief, we have a chief, I thought, but, okay.
That's the fire department, the operating. Is there any questions for anybody? Otherwise, online real quick, just gonna throw it in.
Gonna jump into the first.
Yeah, we jump into the first. Okay, first. Okay, the revenue, why isn't there? Oh, there's 2 pages on there. Revenue includes payment from the rural fire district for 1/2 the capital of the proposed equipment. The other major revenue source for this is the transfer of funds from the CIP excise tax, which pays for the city share of the apparatus. The CIP excise tax is that $3 a month charge you see on the utility bills. The expenditures in the coming biennium in 25-26 are $110,000 for a new command vehicle. And then 26-27 is $340,000 for a new Type 6 engine, which is kind of a brush rig, otherwise referred to as a brush rig. And also, several years ago now, we paid for a new Type 1 engine. We paid for it. That engine is expected to be delivered in a couple weeks. And fire engines are currently taking a long time to build. Also, the department is considering selling the aerial platform or the ladder truck, as it's probably more commonly referred to, due to its lack of use, particularly in Forest Grove, and the difficulty providing proper training to the staff operating the truck. Any proceeds from the sale of the apparatus will be equally divided between the city and the rural fire district, with the city's proceeds being put back into this fund. And it's going to help to cover the cost of other fire apparatus, because the cost of other fire apparatus continues to accelerate.
So the ladder truck wouldn't be used for some of these higher apartment buildings if we had a four-story fire?
I'm gonna let Jim talk about how the ladder trucks would be used. I'll let Jim talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. There are a couple of issues with our ladder truck and the use of it. One, we're not staffed on the truck. In other words, our staffing is cross-staffed. If we have employees who are on the engine and the truck is dispatched, the employees will grab their equipment and switch over to the truck. They have to physically grab their equipment, load it up onto the truck, and then respond on the truck. The only time that will happen is if there's a fire outside of the city. So we would essentially be taking our truck outside of the city, responding to Cornelius or Hillsborough or other. If there was enough staffing during the day, which means there would have to be at least 6 staffed per day, then we could staff both the truck and the engine. That rarely, if ever, happens. So what we find is that our own truck that we maintain, pay for, et cetera, is not responding within our own city. It's responding outside of our city. The other issue is the truck is sort of a specialty apparatus, and there are certain activities that require specified training to be proficient to conduct those duties that are required of a ladder truck. And we don't currently maintain the types of hours that are required to service a ladder truck. It's a concern of our management team. It's a concern of the employees. And we've been considering this for at least a couple of years. And I think we have finally brought this to a priority and made a decision. Last week, I think on Thursday or Friday, we removed the truck from service. And our next course of action is to put it up on the block for sale. We will either sell it with the equipment or without the equipment. And currently, we've been asked by TVF&R to take a look at the truck, and they're interested in purchasing it. We believe that we can sell the truck for what we purchased it for, at least, which was about $900,000 or $950,000.
And if we need it, we can call them, come help us, right? Thank you.
Yeah, well, shout out to ask Jim to confirm that point, that today our staff the engine, we call another municipality for a truck today, that the situation where Jesse Clinton had a fire upstairs.
Yeah, thank you. If we had a need, when we have a need for a truck to respond to a fire in our city, that truck will respond from Hillsborough. And if truck 5 from Hillsborough is not available, it will come from TVF&R. For example, we had maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, we had a fire at the apartment complex just west of Primetime. And to speak to the point that I made a moment ago, our own truck didn't respond to that call because it wasn't staffed. Our staff took the engine because the engine has water, hose, and a pump. That's the priority to respond to a structure fire. So we received the truck from Hillsborough that night, and we would depend on Hillsborough for any future requests or needs for a truck. And by the way, this decision was not made in a vacuum. We spoke within the department with our chief officers, all of our company officers. We met between labor and management. We met with the city manager's office, and we also met with the Forest Grove Rural Fire Protection District board members. And finally, we met with all of the chiefs from all of the departments in Washington County to discuss potential impacts due to taking the truck out of service.
So the truck is now out of service, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
There's no other questions, we will go back. We're almost getting done with the general. Go back.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Have a good night.
What? I need to.
Just because I was getting Jim out of there.
Okay.
I was kicking Jim off.
Okay, planning, economic development, bring it up.
Oh, let's go over.
And you got here right at 6, Brian.
Say what?
I said, it's good thing you got here right at 6.
I was just thinking that, how lucky I was to get here on time, you know?
He likes participating.
Be punctual.
Okay, you'll see two different staffing total lines, which you haven't seen on anybody else's, because we're actually proposing adding a new associate planner as of July 1st, 2026. That's to help meet the need for additional staff to the increased planning goal objectives established by the city council. And the additional planning requirements from the state. The state seems to almost be driving building permit planning more than the localities are anymore, my editorial comment. One half of the proposed position, one half of the position proposed to be funded by the building permit fund, as the position will be doing current planning and permitting for new housing and other developments, so it is an allowable expense of building permit funds since it's related to building activity. Professional services in the first year of the biennium with $25,000 for a West Side planning area financial feasibility study to determine the estimated cost of infrastructure development, potential revenue funded. If the West Side planning area is not financially feasible, the city may have to look to other areas, i.e. land down on the flats, which is going to be another issue to itself to get changes made. The fiscal 26-27 budget plus $50,000 to develop an urban reserve concept plan, which we will need as part of that, as part of the effort for the West Side planning study to be wrapped up and completed. We've also included $150,000 cost funding in year 26-27 to begin a comprehensive plan update. It's expected to take a couple of years due to all the items included in the comprehensive plan and the amount of community engagement that will be needed. So those are the major changes in planning that we've got.
So West Side planning area means basically up in the hills, right?
Yeah, David Hill Reserve Area, West Side Planning Area, kind of use a little bit interchangeably, but you know, technically we'll talk about David Hill Reserve Area. That's way up in the hill. That is outside the urban growth boundary right now, can be brought in with proper concept planning. It was added into the grand bargain, the state legislature added an initiative in 2014. Predates me being here. And there are a lot of sort of questions about how to develop that area. Steep slopes, wildland interface, you know, insurance is a huge part of this discussion now with insurability in fire prone areas and things like that. And so
Water to it.
yeah, getting water to is another thing. With above a certain elevation, we have a hard time getting water suppression. And so prior to really doing a lot of concept planning up there, I mean, we really kind of need to look at is the development up there feasible? And so that feasibility analysis is sort of looking at that. It's like that preliminary step prior to the concept.
Just maybe add one more thing. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna read this with Metro in terms of both the swap in the urban growth boundary to with that Hill and also the target. I know Metro's having some reviews and we're supposed to be target by the end of the year. So I'm curious what we know or what tea leaves we're reading that factor into this next one.
We have received our targets from Metro. We only just received them, so we haven't had much to. And those targets are sort of stratified, if you will, based upon sort of affordability, income, different incomes. And a lot of that will kind of feed into our housing capacity analysis, which is sort of looking at how the city can sort of help provide housing, if you will, at all those different income levels and have the targets and everything. It's probably premature right now to really kind of know how it's going to look. But part of our housing capacity is a lot of that will be carried in this urban reserve area. The catch with this urban reserve area is the fact that you're on steep slopes, you are having that wildland interface and things like that. It just becomes much more expensive to develop. The infrastructure costs more, cuts and fills for roads cost more. And if you're ever going to see housing up there, it's probably not going to be the most affordable place to develop. So that's kind of what we're looking for.
What answers the swap, you can see which will we sell.
I think potentially, I think before you would entertain that, or before Metro would entertain it, though, they would want to have some type of potential concept plan about what you could do in it to kind of characterize, and I think we would want to get an idea of what we might be able to do in it as well before we approach Metro about some potential swap. I will say, it's been 11 years since the Grand Bargain. The Grand Bargain didn't just establish some urban reserves. It took some areas that were in urban reserve and made them rural reserve. And it also took some areas that were previously in urban reserve and put them into the urban growth pattern. So it was a pretty comprehensive piece of legislation. It was passed by the state. And so in theory, depending on what it looks like, if you want to look at a URA or a UGB change, you would likely be looking at, depending on the nexus to the Grand Bargain, you may be looking at state legislation associated with that. Not just us going to Metro and saying, Metro, please do this or don't do it. But I think we have to characterize those areas. What Brian said was spot on. It's expensive to develop. So if you're looking for kind of more affordable, higher density, steep slopes don't tend to do that.
Just 2 quick points on those. You might want to look at Hillsborough's recent letter from the LCD on response to their housing capacity analysis. They included a UGB expansion. It was denied outright. So nope, you are not allowed to consider land outside of the current UGB for housing capacity as a production strategy. Sorry, in their HPS. So they proposed as one of their strategies.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm curious, was that land that was in an urban reserve area that could be added, or just kind of new UGB?
Good question, but I also think it's even if that's not the case, I think it still really, informs our discussion about, swap. And right now there are 2 cities, I think currently they have legislation right now in Salem for exactly this thing. So I don't have a bill number for you, but that is also something to look at. If there's a Monmouth and one other city, it's like a very specific legislation that 2 cities are looking at.
It's outside of the Washington County.
Yeah.
I know that our urban reserve area, a lot of urban reserve areas have been added over the past decade. Sherwood's added, King City's added, Tigard, Beaverton, Hillsborough. So there's been a lot of URA converted to UGB. And so what that does is, we have some of the last URA left, so to speak. And it's going to put, I don't want to say a focus on it, but I think you could say it might put an emphasis on it.
I think that's true. And just to kind of characterize it more, this is not necessarily that useful information. In 2014, when we kind of were talking about this area, I understand it wasn't here. But there was a lot of excitement about sort of executive housing up in the hills, and what that would do for Forest Grove. And that was 2014, right? That was a fundamentally different conversation about housing back then. And so, this is a way of saying a lot's changed since then, and this area is not as attractive to Forest Grove as maybe it was sold at that time.
Thought there on the side of Steve, you should be looking at 1 acre minimums, quite a bit of the area. It's just, that makes it more expensive to develop even. Right. questions, we'll move on to economic development. Shouldn't take too long. It's, the budget's relatively unchanged. The position reports the development director with his proposal start reporting to the assistant city manager after the change. Coming biennium, the position will use a recently adopted economic opportunity analysis to work with the Economic Development Commission to help update the EDC strategic plan, to help define economic development objectives over the next few years, and will also participate in the upcoming URA property development discussion.
Well, it makes sense to push off the last two things for next week. Jump, do the URA since we've already noticed that meeting.
And engineering, there's really nothing to say, so we skip that slide. I've already talked about the move.
Okay.
Non-departmental, the only thing of significance on this slide, real quickly, the first two paragraphs and expenses are the same, kind of just repeats last year. We're proposing transferring, and we've had a surplus of revenue over expenditure from the general fund. We've practice to transfer a portion of that surplus to the major maintenance fund. For these transfers, the interest earnings on those transfers and to the major maintenance fund has been the source of funding for that fund. So staff proposing to transfer $250,000 of what we had $2.7 million surplus this year to the major maintenance fund to help fund some upcoming major maintenance funds in the aquatic center or potentially the police building, and also leave a small balance in the major maintenance fund for emergencies. We're not proposing transferring any more than the $250,000 because we think that would bring the general funds and the proposed balance for the biennium down too far. So we proposing limiting that transfer to $250,000.
Can you go back to the economic development again?
I mean, we can just switch over. We got two things we need to do tonight. One's the state, probably hearing on state share revenue, and then we can start with the urban renewal. I mean, since we got 3 meetings, we've got quite a ways tonight. If we can comfortably, we get those two things done, stop them tonight. I think that's what we ought to do.
What is the DCM?
The what?
So all that's basically saying is that if the ACM is split from the finance director, the economic development coordinator would report directly to the assistant city manager. I think we're trying to reflect kind of one of the emerging themes in the Vision 2040 process, which is the economy. And this would kind of take that and elevate that.
Okay, so let's go to actually, except the building permits, we covered everything else that's been covered, right? We'll come back to building permits in the next meeting. Won't take long. Okay, state shared public revenue hearings. What I need for Dave to do is open a public hearing on state shared revenue. I'll do a staff report.
The meeting is now open for public hearing on state shared revenue.
Okay, we're required to do 2 public hearings each year to be eligible to receive state shared revenue. Each fiscal year, we hold the first hearing at this budget committee meeting, and the second hearing is held at the city council meeting where the 25-27 budget will be adopted. We receiving the following amounts of state shared revenue based on the per capita amount of the city's population compared to the state population. This is biennial revenue, not single year. General fund, alcoholic beverage tax, about 889,000. Cigarette tax over the 2 years, about 31. State share revenue, which is actually a further distribution of the alcoholic beverage tax, about $586,000. State marijuana tax, about $79,000. Gasoline tax for the biennium, 99% of the gas tax by state constitution, that's got street funds, so that's about $4.4 million roughly. And then 1% of the gas tax has to go into the bike and pedestrian pathways fund. And that's about $44,000. The purpose of this public hearing is to take public comment on whether we actually want to receive that revenue or not. So I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment that you're aware of, Jamie?
I received no written comment and there is no one on Zoom who wishes to speak.
Close the meeting for public comment, having received none. And we'll move on to open the meeting for public comment on our proposed fiscal year 25-27 budget. I'm guessing the same answer, that you don't have
It is
anybody.
the same. There, I received no written public comment and there is nobody on Zoom wishing to share.
Thank you. There being no comment, comment section is closed. We'll announce that our next meeting is scheduled for May 20th, from 5 to 6 p.m. in the same location and on Zoom. And we will adjourn this meeting until that time. Don't go away. We have one more we gotta do real quick.
Don't run.
Don't run.
But yeah, there's more.
We now are opening, call to order the Urban Renewal Agency meeting. We'll- Yes, we need to do a roll call vote.
Let's switch gears.
I guess you're supposed to do that, aren't you? Sorry,
Oh,
I stepped on your toes.
that's okay.
Back to you.
I'd like to call to order this meeting of the URA budget. Will the executive assistant to the city manager please call?
Raquel Bateman, excused. Tom Cook, excused. Or Director Faulkner,
Here.
Marissa Galvin,
Here.
Director Gustafson,
Here.
Mallory Highfield, here. Carla Kinsey,
Here.
Director Marshall, Director Martinez,
Here.
Director Schibel,
Here.
Director Valenzuela,
Here.
Chair Wenzel,
Here.
and Chair Anderson.
Here.
Great, I'd like to move on to item B on our agenda, which is the election of the chair. Are there any nominations or volunteers for chair?
I'll nominate David as the chair.
I'll second. Thank you, Director Belvin, Director Belvin, do you accept them?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor of David Anderson being the chair, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Hearing none. I'm going to pass it over to you, Mr.
Okay, thank
Anderson.
you.
Thank you.
This is a period in the meeting where we can take public comment on the Urban Renewal Agency budget. I'm not aware of any public comment. I'm guessing you are not either,
That
Jamie.
is correct. No written comment and no one.
We'll move on. There's no consent agenda to deal with. Are there any additions or deletions to the meeting minutes or to the meeting agenda that any member wishes to add? Hearing none, we'll go on to the budget message for the Urban Renewal Agency.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I talked with Paul. I think I'm just going to combine my URA message with this message up here and roll it all into one. The broader message for the URA is we really kind of hit an inflection point this year. The URA board, for those that are new to the budget committee, the URA board is separate and distinct from the city, and then it has its own fund source. It is composed of a board of directors. The board of directors are the city council, and so we heard Jamie earlier say Chair Wenzel. The mayor is the mayor of the city council, but the chair of the Urban Renewal Agency board. I'm not the city manager of the Urban Renewal Agency. I'm the executive director of the Urban Renewal Agency. So just kind of think of a different hat. It's a different organization, different entity, different hat, and a different budget. One of the things that Urban Renewal Agency does, its primary purpose is to try to raise the assessed value in the urban renewal area. And in doing so, when the Urban Renewal Agency expires, and in our particular case, the state changed the law, so it expires when your debt expires. But in our initial passage of the URA, it was slated to expire in 2034. So 9 years from now. Am I right? 2034, 2035? I think it was 2034. So about 10 years, actually, from now. And in doing so, when it expires, by investing in that area, using what's called tax increment financing, you can raise the assessed value, and in doing so, return more back to the general fund than you otherwise would have without that investment. So you're just investing in your community by using a different kind of funding source. So make a long story short, this year, the URA board borrowed $4.25 million over a 10-year period. That money is intended to purchase, in this case, 2 properties. They are properties that were listed in the urban renewal plan. the board went through a strategic discussion about all of those properties. We had a real estate agent that was present during that, and they decided to purchase 2 properties. One was the gravel lot at Woodfull. That's that property right over there on 19th, and then the other one was the theater building on Pacific, on the north side of Pacific, the north and the west side of Main Street, the one with the iconic kind of sign that sticks out, not the one that's presently being used, but the one where Pactai is, for example. That building. So that's what those monies were for. Some of those monies were also looked at to make improvements to those properties and or to help incentivize financial investment in those properties or to try and incentivize a potential particular use of those properties. In this case, the theater building, what was discussed was potentially a boutique hotel. And what was discussed down at Woodfold is that's basically a gravel lot. You can kind of really go through a planning process, a concept planning process with the board about what might you want to see there. So we took out that. The other thing that kind of was new this year was what's called a building improvement grant program. This was also called out in the urban renewal plan that was funded at $350,000 a year. The building improvement grant, the board went through its first awards this year. 5 awards or 6 awards, 5 or 6 awards were made on projects downtown where we essentially matched private equity coming into the projects at 50-50, 1-to-1. And in doing so, again, increase investment in downtown and the urban rural area. So big picture, the proposed budget essentially funds the programs for the storefront facade, the building improvement grant, and the design grant program. It fully funds those programs at the pre-existing levels, and then purchases the properties. And then if you look at over the biennium, approximately there'll be about $1.5 million in the bank or in reserves that the board could look at doing something strategic with one of those 3 properties or all 3 of those properties, because now the URA will own Site B, the theater building, and Woodfold, if the 2 later sales fully go through.
Actually close on the theater today. Oh, should have.
So the theater building has been closed. Yep. So the Woodfold, we're still going through what's called a deep gap analysis. But it's in process and it's moving forward. So kind of looking ahead, we're just proposing kind of the same budget pretty much as we had last year, which was to fund all of the grant programs, the 3 grant programs that I mentioned. And then we want to start some kind of concept discussions about what to do with these 3 properties. And we've included some money for some consultancy in there that could look at either some concept planning, some financial feasibility analysis, maybe look at kind of a boutique hotel, financial report, market assessment, those types of things. We wanted some flexibility. So
Is that on the next slide? How much?
that's probably, can you go to the next slide, Paul? I'm trying to remember the amount. So Jamie, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so 20, so the storefronts at $20,000. The building improvement grant program was at $350,000, which is the same as last year. We have $100,000 in for repairs for the theater building roof and to connect to the sump pump. And then I'm trying to remember, Paul, what was the amount we paid for the consultancy? Because I don't see what.
The expensive, what we're paying for like a consultant.
For consultancy.
Yeah, like.
There's money in,
marketing or-
there's some money in professional services.
Professional services.
It's not, I didn't detail it, I mean, it's not a lot of money, but you also got to remember, you've got $101.4 million in undesignated funds where if you need money for other consultants as you're going through the analysis of each of the 3 properties, you have those funds available to also use for that purpose. So I mean, I budgeted like 15, 20.
I just think it's important with, if those purchases go through and the council, the directors and the URA, the board, thank you, have a discussion about community engagement, marketing, developer, hiring consultants, would be nice to.
There's $30,000 over the biennium for professional services, but if you need more, you could access the undesignated funds for more of those funds, for more money.
Yeah, I foresee us needing more.
That seems awfully low for having a viable. I would guess it's closer to 100,000 for something like that, especially for the theater building. Maybe it's more straightforward for the
When we looked at the theater building, we had we
Yeah.
paid an architect to come up with some concept designs for basically how could a boutique hotel fit in the theater building. We paid about $15,000 for a couple concept designs on that, so that we have something for somebody to start working with on that.
I think it's kind of really a question of trying to characterize these properties sufficiently that the board has enough information in which to make a decision about what you want to pursue. And then, in pursuing that, if we want to have potential developers, look at kind of, putting those plans together, or how much do we want to plan and put out there? And those are conversations we could have. I think as Paul mentioned, we've got some in undesignated that we can reappropriate if the board would like.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're making recommendations, I'd say for 130. Ballpark for, because you're talking about architecture, capital needs assessment, or engineering. Evaluation.
Actually, I would agree with you, because it's 3 properties.
Three
right?
properties.
And, I mean, but, yeah, and I understand what you're saying, that we have these
Yeah.
funds, but I also like transparency.
I think we can
And-
propose to move some of the money out of undesignated for professional services.
I mean, I know we haven't just, like, I understand staff's position where we haven't had a meeting to say this and this and this, but this also, like, maybe also a 10-year plan for the URA, right? Like, there's some different things we need to do. And so I just think that being as transparent as we can with the community, that, hey, we did this land banking, we're gonna engage with the community about cleaning salons, and then we're gonna market it to, like,
Yeah.
hopefully, be like Field of Dreams. Great movie. Anyway.
We'd be happy to do that. We'd be
Yeah,
happy.
I also need to modify the ERA budget for rent income and expenses that I didn't.
I guess,
I just included on this proposed budget.
not to belabor it too much, but we've kind of got this 10-year window now. Where we've taken debt out over the 10 years. We've got grant programs that we've implemented. And when you add the debt repayments on the 4.25 million and you total the grant payments for the grant programs, that's pretty much our annual operating revenue. So our grant programs and our debt service is pretty much equaling what our revenues are going to be, which means that you have this kind of strategic discussion now about what to do with the reserves, right? What to do with the undesignated, and how can those monies be leveraged to do something that the board and the community wants to do on those 3 properties? That's the fundamental question, right? And I think the chair mentioned it earlier, we're looking at something over 10 years. By way of example, Hillsborough has block 57. If you look at block 57, it's an entire block. It's where the old Hank Striffway used to be. They've done 3 RFPs on that site over the course of 9 years now, none of which has been successful. And interestingly enough, when they didn't do an RFP, they had somebody come to them with a proposal.
I think that's a really good point, and I just want to make sure, like, because we haven't had a board of conversation about how much money to spend on that planning, because you
Right.
can do a whole lot of planning, and then you lock in a property, and you've actually pushed away 99.9% of the customers who may be
Right.
interested. So that's a real
That's-
strategic conversation that we should have.
Yeah.
And each
It's
property
more
is
about
different.
dedicating $130,000.
Each property is different. One Bolt's fairly flat and it's a decent size 2 acres. The theater's got its own, theater has its own issues and challenges. They're gonna have to be moved around. And site B essentially it's got enough of a grade where it can potentially affect what's being developed. Part of the reason the grocery store ended up backing out of it is they had about $1.1 million in additional grading costs because it wasn't a flat lot. And they just couldn't get over the hump of those additional costs of site development to make the storefronts allowed. So each site has its own elements to it.
So Chair, that concludes my budget.
Linda, would you like this to come back up next time for
I don't know.
spin through?
I don't know. I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. You know it is.
We'll bring it up with some staff proposed changes based on what was said tonight. Okay, the third.
Yeah, that'd be good to incorporate some of those changes into oil, probably good. All right, any other questions about the urban New agency, public comment is now open. We don't have anybody on the Zoom who wants to comment, but Jamie will check.
Hey,
Negative, public comment is now closed. And we adjourned until May 28th, 2025.
May 20th.
no, that's.
Oh, no, this one's
first-
28. This one's 28.
Yeah, we're skipping a meeting.
That's right.
Okay, okay.
We just go to the approval. for this.
So, but we have one next week. for
We
the
do have one.
budget.
Yes.
We do have a
URA will
budget
not be
meeting
discussed
next
on the
week.
27th.
Correct.
Let's make it as confusing as possible. We are meeting next week, but the URA will not be meeting.
That's right. Very well. Meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, the URA. Okay. Yeah.